Good afternoon, Mr. Young. This is Anthony Hood. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
How that sound? Sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, I thank you, sir.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are approaching the hour of 4 o'clock. We probably have about 30 seconds. I want to start on time because I want to make sure that we're able to hear from the public and hopefully finish within a reasonable time. It's 4 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and read the, Mr. Young, could you start the recording? This is a round table, so we can kind of not be so structured. Okay. I'm sure others will join us at the as soon as they're available. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are convening and broadcasting this public roundtable of the Zoning Commission of the District of Columbia by video conferencing on Thursday, September 22nd, 2022. My name is Anthony Hood. Joining me are Vice Chair Miller. Soon to join me are Commissioner Ema Moore and Commissioner May. We're also joined by the Office of Zoning staff, Ms. Sharon Shellen, as well as Mr. Paul Young, who will be working behind the scenes. Also, our zoning, Office of Zoning Legal Division, our counsel, Ms. Hillary Lubbock. I will ask all others to introduce themselves at the appropriate time. The purpose of this evening's roundtable is to hear public feedback on the commission's initial racial equity analysis tool and the commission's application of the tool to date. This roundtable will not focus on any specific projects due to the potential future hearings. Such exchange of information could be considered ex parte communication. So I ask you to please stay in compliance with that. The roundtable announcement is available on Office Zoning's website. This proceeding is being recorded by a court reporter and is also webcast live via WebEx and YouTube Live. The video will be available on Office of Zoning's website after the hearing. Accordingly, all those listening on WebEx or by phone will be muted during the hearing, and only those who have signed up to participate or testify will be unmuted at the appropriate time. When called, please state your name and home address before providing your testimony. When you are finished speaking, please mute your audio. I want to thank everyone who is testifying in tonight's roundtable. We are here at my suggestion, which my fellow commissioners agreed to. And I want to say this again because I think it's important. We are here at my suggestion, which my colleagues, my fellow commissioners, staff, and everybody agreed to, because we are here to get constructive feedback. As we stated in the announcement, we are very interested in public feedback, which is constructive to help us move this and everything forward in the correct manner. And input on your racial equity analysis tool. I digress from my statement and our application of it thus far. The current tool is just the first iteration. This is going to be tackled, improved, changed to make it really work, because where the rubber meets the road, as I've said previously. The current tool is just the first iteration, and we intend to continually refine it. We are most interested in your ideas, and suggestions about how we refine the tool and move forward. We are interested in your ideas of how we refine the tool and move forward. I will mention that the Office of Zoning staff has been in discussions with the Mayor's Office on Racial Equity and the DC's Council's Office on Racial Equity. And based on those discussions, we do intend to make two changes in the next iteration of the tool. First, we intend to include a community engagement and outreach component in the tool to better understand and account for those efforts. And second, we intend to include an active link in the tool to the Office of Planning's Equity Crosswalk, which identifies policies in the comp plan that advance equity. Tonight, they find this hard to believe, but tonight, we will not respond directly to your testimony, but your insights will be considered and we will refine the tool further. The following time constraints will be maintained in this roundtable: organizations, 5 minutes, individuals, 3 minutes. The commission intends to maintain these time limits as strictly as possible in order to hear from everyone in a reasonable period of time. The commission reserves the right to change the time limits for presentations if necessary. Notes that no time shall be ceded. If you experience difficulty accessing WebEx or with your telephone call-in, then please call our OZ hotline number at 202-727-0789 to sign up or to receive WebEx login or call-in instructions. All persons planning to testify must sign in advance and will be called by name at the appropriate time. If you are listening and haven't signed up and want to testify, you need to call the hotline. If you wish to file written testimony or additional supporting documents during the hearing, I'm probably sounding redundant, but we want to make it clear, then be prepared to describe and discuss it at the time of your testimony and ask to file a document. Okay, I have a few comments of my own. I want to thank the Honorable, I've asked Councilman McDuffie to join us for this roundtable. He has other engagements. I really didn't ask him until last night, which was my shortcoming on that one, so I'll take the hit, but I will tell you this. I want to thank Councilman McDuffie and his colleagues. He was the author of the racial equity. Before he got ready to introduce it, he and I spoke about it. So this whole piece is near and dear to me, and I'm sure my colleagues as well. Also want to thank Mayor Bowser and her team. And also want to thank Ms. Hillary Lovett and all her team and all those people she has been interacting with to make us at least give us a start. And the staff and everybody in the office zone and everybody who has worked on this, I want to thank you, because I think this is where the rubber meets the road. This is not just a conversational piece. We want to get it to the point where, first of all, what we put in place is legal, and even more than that, what we put in place works for the residents of this city. And I want to thank the residents today who are going to testify, who are going to help us to continue to help the city to put something in place where we all can benefit and gain, and we all won't leave anybody behind. So with that, those are my comments. I don't know, do any of my colleagues have any opening statements? And if not, we're here to listen tonight. Okay, I see everybody now. I guess I've talked enough. All right, so with that, Michelle, I'm going to turn over the reins of who's called and everything to you at this time, if you don't mind. I want to sit back and listen and take my notes. And another thing I think is key to the public. Yesterday in my discussions with staff, I have about 2 to 3 people taking notes. And I know my colleagues will be taking notes. Commissioner May is excellent with taking notes. I'm gonna do my best to take notes and try to do this as we go along. And I want to thank all those who've already advanced doing stuff as well. And that's DC Empower, some of the ANCs. I was able to attend or listen in on one of the events. And I want to thank all, because it takes a lot of work in bringing people together. So I want to thank them and all those who have worked with DC Empower and others to help us to get this going. So I thank you very much. And I thank everybody. So Michelle, I'm gonna turn it over to you and I'm gonna start taking notes. I will run the procedure. And I would ask everybody to be cognizant of the time. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. So we're gonna start with DC government agencies, and the first will be 2 representatives from the Office of the Attorney General. If Mr. Young could please bring up Alexandra Kane and Lily Bullitt. And while you're at it, if you could go ahead and after they speak, the commission will hear from Amber Hewitt, who is from, if I get this right, the Office of Racial Equity. She'll follow behind OAG. Thank you. They'll each have 5 minutes. Well, one representative from OAG, I'm not sure who's gonna, oh, it looks like they're together. So I believe Ms. Kane's gonna take that 5 minutes or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shellen, commissioners, good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. I'm Alexandra Kane. I'm here with my colleague Lily Bullitt on behalf of the Equitable Land Use section of the Office of the Attorney General. We appreciate the Zoning Commission holding this public roundtable. We think it's an important part of the process and we're excited to participate. I would ask Mr. Young if he could pull up our PowerPoint, which is in the record at Exhibit 25A. It's a lot of information. We're going to try and get through it as quickly as possible. So we may skip over a couple things, but the full thing is in the record for the commission to review at your leisure. Okay.
And I need just a minute to pull that up because I didn't receive it.
While it's in the record, if you need help finding that, let me know. I may be able to email it to
What
you.
exhibit was it?
25A.
Ms. Kane, in the future, if you have a PowerPoint presentation, if you could email after you upload it to the record, if you could please email it to Mr. Young, that saves the time of him having to go to the record.
Yep, will do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Young. If you can go to slide 2, please. Okay, we can just start here. That's fine. So we wanted to sort of start our discussion and like as a bit in the language of the comprehensive plan when it comes to racial equity. As the commission is aware, the comprehensive plan does charge the zoning commission with preparing and implementing tools to analyze all zoning actions through a racial equity lens. In terms of what that involves, the comprehensive plan does provide these sort of 4 guiding principles, including the requirement to disaggregate data and analyze that data based on race. Next slide, please. So in coming up with our recommendations, OAG wanted to base them in those sort of 4 points. And the result is a sort of 3-pronged plan that you see here. And I'm going to quickly run through the different elements of that in the coming slides. So next slide, please. So the first, the identification of past and current systemic racial inequities, we see being broken down into 2 sort of subcategories. 1, data and analysis, and 2, a narrative that puts that data into a larger context. So the data you see here is all available through the US Census, so publicly available. It's here for sort of illustrative purposes. We do not believe that this is the final breakdown of everything that might be needed. But sort of generally, we believe that the data should be disaggregated by race, should be shown at the census tract and district level. It should show change over time, and it should be displayed graphically for ease of understanding. Next slide. So I'm going to run you through a couple of the graphs that we have pulled together based on data that comes from a council land disposition, so not a zoning case, either past or present. So as you can see here, this is sort of the importance of showing data in different ways. So you can see the percentage of the population, both as a percentage in the census tract as a whole, and also the change over time. So seeing the dramatic decrease in the Black population while the white population is increasing at the same time. Next slide, please. So here, just wanted to put this in context and the importance of providing district-wide data in addition to census tract level data so that the census tract is understood within the broader context of the district. Next slide, please. And here we see those same sort of data points, again, broken down by race. So showing median household income at both the census tract and the district level. So you're able to see how it's changing in the census tract versus in the district as a whole. Next slide, please. And this one, I think we're going to skip over. So next slide. So here you can see how the census tract is a high rent area. It is almost double what the median gross rent in the district as a whole is. And then to the graph to the right, you can see how that has impacts in terms of race, in terms of how Black households in the census tract are more likely to be significantly rent burdened than white families. Next slide, please. And this is just sort of the result of that, where you see the decreasing Native Washingtonian population, reflecting displacement pressures within that census tract. Next slide, please. So the other component of this first part is the narrative section. So this uses policy areas laid out in the comprehensive plan, as well as asking for additional details about the historical patterns affecting the census tract. So any history of urban renewal programs, highway construction, redlining, as well as any information that might be helpful for understanding changes within the census tract or specific information relative to the zoning action. Next slide, please. So part 2 gets to the impacts of the specific zoning action. So this is looking at whether those impacts will have any disparate impact on any particular racial group. It also involves a discussion of any outreach that has been done by the applicant or the petitioner. Next slide, please. So this comes from a Council Office of Racial Equity RAIA on a land disposition. We just felt it was an interesting example of how the specific effects of a project can be documented. So this shows the affordability of the proposed units in the project for both Black and white families based on median family income. So you can see 100% of the units would be affordable to white families, but only 18%, or those top boxes highlighted in blue, would be affordable for Black families. Next slide, please. And then finally are the equitable development measures. So this is looking at what measures are being proposed by the applicant to help reduce systemic racial inequities and promote equitable development outcomes. And again, we see this as having a community outreach component in it. Next slide, please. And finally, our recommended procedure for this, we feel that this could easily be built onto the existing zoning practice of having submissions from the applicant or petitioner at the Office of Planning, and then of course by the Zoning Commission in the final order or notice of final rulemaking. Next slide, please. And at this point, if I may, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Bullitt. She's done the lion's share of the work on the displacement risk indicators and maps, which we feel is another really critical component of the Commission's understanding of the racial equity analysis tool.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. So in our research of other jurisdictions' approaches to racial equity and zoning, we found that many cities are measuring and visualizing the risk of displacement. Next slide, please. Preventing displacement is a priority in the comp plan, and the comp plan defines displacement as a physical, economic, and cultural displacement. Next slide, please. The comp plan specifically calls for racial equity analyses that collect, disaggregate, and monitor data about displacement. Next slide, please. So first up, we have Seattle. In 2016, when they were amending their comprehensive plan, they created the Displacement Risk Index and the Access to Opportunity Index. By overlaying these two indices, they were able to identify and categorize neighborhoods based on their displacement risk and access to opportunity, and then determine how growth may benefit or burden those neighborhoods. Next slide, please. They based their indicators on these factors, but I'll let you take a look at that later. This is in the record. Next slide, please. New York also has an interactive displacement risk map. Next slide, please. So when you click on one of those neighborhoods, it displays the factors that contribute to displacement risk. Next slide, please. And the displacement risk map in New York is a component of a larger tool, New York's Equitable Development Data Tool, which provides data at the neighborhood level on demographics, economics, housing affordability and production, as well as access to opportunity. Next slide, please. So these are some of the factors that it shows in that census data. This is Boston's displacement risk map. Next slide, please. And the indicators that it's based on. Next slide, please. And in Boston's zoning process, applicants are required to consult both the displacement risk map and this related community profile tool. So the community profile tool generates a report based on census data, based on the proposed project site. The report includes census data and analysis, which the applicant then uses to fill out as questions in their application on equity and impact. And this is how they incorporate it into their zoning process. Next slide, please. These next 3 slides you can run through. It's just examples of the data that is provided through this tool. Yeah, one more slide, please. So OAG recommends the creation of a displacement risk map for the district, which is to be incorporated into the racial equity analysis, and that the displacement risk map and the census data be incorporated into the zoning map so that it is accessible to the public and it streamlines the RIA process for applicants.
Next slide, please. That concludes our testimony. We would respectfully request that the commission leave the record open for at least another 48 hours to allow the submission of any additional testimony and comments. We would also request that the commission ask the Office of Planning to prepare a text amendment that formalizes the RAIA tool and process. We think that's a really critical component to ensure consistent and uniform application of RAIAs across the board, and also make sure that it's clear that the Zoning Commission is meeting the requirements of the comprehensive plan. We'd also ask the commission to ask the Office of Planning to develop a displacement risk map tool for eventual incorporation into the RAIA process along the lines of what my colleague has described. With that, we conclude our testimony and we thank the commission for their time today.
Shannon, I'm gonna let you drive the train, so I'm just gonna stay muted and I'm gonna take notes.
Okay, so Ms. Hewitt, you can go ahead, unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Chairman Hood and the Zoning Commission and Office of Zoning Staff for the opportunity to provide testimony today. My name is Dr. Amber Hewitt, and I was appointed by Mayor Bowser to serve as the district's first Chief Equity Officer and the Director of the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity, also known as ORE. In this role, my team is responsible for establishing the framework for all district government agencies to apply racial equity principles through the creation of just policies, programs, and practices. We recognize the best approach to achieve true racial equity is to work directly with district residents. And to that end, we want residents to be equal shareholders in DC's growth. Residents' lived experiences must be a central part of our vision of racial equity for the district. I think it's important that we pause to understand the definition of racial equity. It is both a process and an outcome. As an outcome, we achieve racial equity when one's race or ethnicity no longer predicts opportunities, outcomes, or the distribution of resources for district residents. As a process, we apply a racial equity lens when those most impacted by structural racial inequity are meaningfully involved in the creation and implementation of the institutional policies and practices that directly impact their lives. In its simplest form, a racial equity lens or tool is a set of questions asked in decision-making processes to include the lived experiences and voices of individuals who have been impacted by structural racism. We use a racial equity lens to help identify and prevent barriers to equitable outcomes. A racial equity lens cannot dictate what choices to make, but it can help the user to make more informed, inclusive decisions. District government's racial equity tool, developed by the Office of Racial Equity, includes a focus on disaggregated data by race and ethnicity, stakeholder engagement, weighing both benefits and burdens, and setting appropriate metrics to evaluate outcomes. The Office of Planning, Office of Zoning, and Zoning Commission have expressed their commitment to promoting racial equity, which stems from Mayor Bowser's commitment for a more racially equitable DC. The Office of Racial Equity is encouraged by the work of the Zoning Commission in the development of a racial equity tool to be applied to zoning actions. My team has had ongoing collaboration with the Office of Zoning after the first draft of the tool was released, and has provided trainings on racial equity tools and best practices, one of which is prioritizing meaningful community engagement. I'd like to thank Chairman Hood for incorporating our feedback on this critical component. ORE is familiar with the various types of zoning actions and the limitations of the Zoning Commission, and our team is committed to continued collaboration and will provide additional feedback on the tool as it is refined and further developed. Thank you.
Okay, you ready for the next panel? So
Yes, we
Mr.
are,
Young?
Michelle. And let me just thank everyone. I'm trying not to do a lot of talk because I want to do more listening. I'm listening to hear, not listening to speak. But I want to thank everybody. If I don't thank you right away, I want to thank everybody who's testifying. Let me do that now. Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Okay. Chairman Hood, how many would you like to come up at a time? 4?
I was going to leave some people up, but I'm going to ask like Ms. Hewitt and others if the time is available, not to go far, because I like for them to listen to. We may have to call them back up. I have some others that I'm thinking about. But for right now, I think whatever will the load take 4 or 5, or whatever won't confuse Paul and
Okay.
yourself. I'll
Okay.
leave it to y'all. Okay.
Since you're not going to ask questions once they testify, Mr. Young can go ahead and take them down after they testify.
But we may at the end, because we want to hear from the residents, we may at the end ask for a few to come back. But
Right.
go
I
ahead.
know Ms. Hewitt has to leave at 5
Okay.
for another appointment. So
That's
we'll
good.
go through it as quickly as we can.
Okay.
Brenda Richardson. I don't see her. Chris Williams. Parisa Narusi. I did see her. Renee Bowser. Carol Ayton. And let's go with Jamie Epstein. That gives us 5. We'll start there. Chris Williams was first.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I will begin. My name is Chris Williams. I live at 201 I Street Southwest in the 20024 zip code. I've been before the Zoning Commission many times, imploring this body to stop structural racism that derive from racist legacies such as urban renewal, redlining, and wholesale removal. The Zoning Commission has been directly responsible for unprecedented displacement among Black residents. It has approved projects over the objections of affected residents and ANCs. We have presented volumes of data to you about ongoing harm that you systematically ignored. Your approvals have injured people, especially Black people, in profound ways. The Superior Court recently recognized the harm that I've personally experienced in Southwest due to massive redevelopment. As we discuss changes, we should not let you proceed without a full public accounting of the scale and scope of the damages for which you are directly responsible. There are several points that I would like to make. First, after the development of the racial equity tool, it must be adopted as a text amendment. The law as written does not require that you have a single racial equity tool. You could theoretically adopt multiple tools based on different decisions. But if you adopt a single racial equity tool as a text amendment, that is much more binding in the long term for the Zoning Commission. This is important because the community does not trust the Zoning Commission. After all, it has not looked after the public welfare for at least the past 15 years. Chairman Mendelson recently said on a call with Empower DC that a racial equity tool must acknowledge race. The one-pager that is available to the public does not appear to put much importance on race, much less the deep chasms of racial health and wealth and equity in the district. As you may be aware, the median white household income in Washington, D.C. is at least twice, if not 3 times greater than the median Black household income. When we think about area median income, we must think about the difference, the vast difference in racial wealth and equity. There's also racial inequity in health. Another part of the tool will be to really consider the parts of the district where you have done the most damage. I live in Southwest Washington, D.C., and we are the epicenter of gentrification in the district, as well as the epicenter of gentrification in this country. We are seeing increased cost of living, increasing rents, but we don't receive more amenities, and we experience cultural and economic marginalization. When the Zoning Commission has negotiated community benefits agreements, those have largely flowed to benefit those on the waterfront side rather than the side of Southwest containing the greatest concentration of African Americans and low-income Americans. Your policies are catalyzing immense change in Southwest beyond the particular decisions that you make in a given case. what we are seeing is that low-income housing is under pressure to redevelop. This is not just public housing in Southwest. My own building is under pressure to redevelop, and it's caused us to have greater expenses in terms of a legal case that is ongoing. So when you look at and think about racial equity, you must account for the entire environment and the long-term consequences. Continuing to concentrate developments in parts of the city like Southwest, while other parts of the city go without any redevelopment. And here I am specifically thinking of Capitol Hill, that is a historic district, Georgetown, and other parts that are part of our legacy of redlining.
Mr. Williams, thank you.
Thank you.
Your time is up, and I would ask everybody, I know Mr. Williams was the first, well, one of the first. I would ask everybody to look at the clock, because I want to make sure that in a reasonable hour, that I hear from everyone. We have a few people who want to testify. I want to make sure we're respectful to everyone. And I also want to just say, and I'm trying not to say much, I'm looking tonight, the idea when I had this with my colleagues, for us to get solutions to help us. I could go back and look in the history, and I'm not being defensive. I'm just saying I need solutions so this stuff works, not just a conversational piece, not just something. I want to make sure. I want to see results. I want to see the data and all that's fine, but I want to get it to the people who most need it, and the people who are and that have been disenfranchised for years. Let's get it there. We can throw pot shots and all, but I'm going to ask everyone to please help me and help the commission to help us get there. That's what this is all about. That's what it's all about. So help us with solutions and resolutions. So I'll leave it at that. So I'm sorry, Michelle, I'm gonna do my best not to say a whole lot.
Sure. Teresa, you're next. You have 5 minutes.
Great. Can you? I don't know if you can see.
I can't hear you. I can hear you now.
You can hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Great. And do you see me? I don't see myself, so I don't know.
We can see you.
Okay. Oh, there I go. Okay. I see that. Okay. My name is Parisa Nuruzi. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Empower DC, which is a citywide grassroots organization working to advance equitable development, environmental justice, and racial equity since 2003. I reside at 232 Quackenboss Street Northwest, 20011. I'm here today to, first let me say, Chairman Hood, I do appreciate your leadership in calling for this roundtable. I think this is exactly the kind of forums that we need to be having. I hope we can expand this and maybe do some more grassroots forums in the community as well as you move into your next steps to really flesh out this tool and work towards implementation. I want to ask also if you could keep the record open for maybe 2 weeks to allow folks, including myself, who did not get the written statement in on time, to submit things for the record. As well, I would urge you to consider creation of a task force or a committee that could include community representatives, folks from relevant DC agencies, maybe even practitioners from around the country to help shape this tool. And thank you for acknowledging in your opening that this will ultimately become a legal requirement. And so we look forward to that being translated into, I suppose, a zoning text amendment. There's, some really great language in the comprehensive plan that I think it is very instructive to go back and to look at that language, and helps guide us. What I really want to focus on is the meaningful community engagement. And I do want to thank Amber Hewitt for emphasizing that as well. And it doesn't mean that I, have less interest in the data or the mapping. I think all of that is important. But I do think that the qualitative data, which you only get from community engagement, is a piece that, cannot be minimized. And Chairman Hood, you've, expressed that you really do want to see this have real results for people. I think the first step of that is through really giving people an opportunity to be part of this process. So I do want to just reference a couple of things in the comp plan when it talks about first let me say, you know, right now I think we all recognize this, but in case it's not recognized, the zoning process as a whole is inaccessible. And, you know, in addition to mandating the engagement within the racial equity tool, we really do need to look at the process as a whole. Issues of notice, standing, and accessibility, digital exclusion, language access, other factors that would create barriers for people to meaningfully participate. We really do need to do everything that we can, as you said, Chairman, to level the playing field, and there's still some work to be done. A lot of emphasis has been placed on the ANC as the community's voice, but, you know, just, you know, we do need to recognize that ANC's, it is still a major, even with an active ANC, you're typically going up against high paid zoning attorneys representing the developer side. So it's still quite an imbalance in representation within these proceedings. And most ANCs are relatively new, don't have a lot of background in zoning. And so it is a bit unfair to expect them to be able to navigate this process without additional assistance. The comp plan is very clear that meaningful involvement is a key aspect of racial equity. I'm going to reference a couple of quotes here. It says that we apply a racial equity lens when those most impacted by structural racism are meaningfully involved in the creation and implementation of the policies and practices. And it references equitable development, which is really our goal. And it talks about equitable development as a participatory approach for meeting the needs of underserved communities, that it builds the capacity of vulnerable, marginalized, and low-income communities to fully and substantively participate in the decision-making process. And so that's the standard that we really need to be thinking of with regard to racial equity. How are we building the capacity of impacted communities to be meaningfully involved in decision making? I also think that the definitions of environmental justice are really instructive here. The definition from EPA emphasizes fair treatment and meaningful involvement. And with regard to meaningful involvement, it states that potentially affected community members should have an appropriate opportunity to participate in decisions about a proposed activity that will affect their environment or health. 2, the public's contribution can influence the agency's decision. So that's a key piece, that meaningful involvement, they should have the opportunity to influence the decision. 3, that the concerns of all participants involved will be considered in the decision-making process. And 4, the decision makers seek out and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected. So that's a very active standard, right? It's not passive. We can't just post a notice in the, you know, in the DC Register or have an email go out and expect that that will facilitate meaningful community involvement. And as a community organizer, I do recognize that this is a labor-intensive process. However, we know this to be true, that an inequitable process cannot lead to an equitable outcome. That work must be done to win the trust and level the playing field prior to engagement, really, which it's vital work and it can't be minimized. You really can't do effective community engagement if you don't know the community. And so we do have to think about, you know, where is the effective, who should be doing the engagement and who should be helping to design the engagement plan. Meaningful relationships are built over time. It can't just be at the last minute when a decision is being made. It can't be, you know, something where people are asked to sign on to something that they don't fully have the opportunity to understand. Engagement should be ongoing and continue after decisions are made, so that it includes the community in implementation and enforcement. Community members hold expertise and knowledge, and the applicants should first and foremost be looking to learn from impacted residents. And the engagement process must be transparent. Information must be accessible. Too often we're forced to fight for the information that is critical to our ability to participate. I'm sorry, am I out of time, or can I continue a little bit?
Let me say you're out of time, but let me say this. I believe that I agree with you. I was thinking in the lines of the work group. I don't know if I would call it work group, task force. I haven't talked to my colleagues, but I appreciate you bringing that up. I think I know from the work I've seen you do and others, if I get the task force, I have to present it to my colleagues and figure out how it's going to work. I would like for you, you're one of the people that I've already targeted to be involved because, as you mentioned, your community organization. So you, Mr. Teresa, and I'm also looking at some, I want to balance it. I want it to be balanced. So that's one of the things I'm looking at. And again, let me just say this. I'm not saying this because I've watched your work over the years, and I'm not sucking up to nobody because I don't do that. But what I am saying is I'm watching your work, and I don't think we're that far apart. It's about organization. I appreciate the work that you all have done. If you can stick around, I may bring you back up later. I don't know if you can listen to the, I know people are busy, have a lot of other things to do. But if not, I plan on having some more of these if my colleagues would agree, because I want this to work. And do we have your statement, or do you've also
No,
asked?
I need to submit it. I do have a couple more, sort of detailed recommendations for what that engagement could look like. So I can submit that if you'll
Yeah,
leave
if you
the
could
record
submit
open.
that, and we will leave the record open as you OAG said 48 hours, you said 2 weeks. To me, this is not a formality of support, undeclared, proponent, opponent. To me, it's about getting information. Because there's some things in the tools, some things that are being said, some things done that I don't support, and I want to be quiet. I'm trying to be quiet. so the goal is, so Ms. Reese, I appreciate all your work. Stay tuned. Please submit that, and also, and we thank you for your testimony. And colleagues, let me say, if you have any questions, colleagues, of any of them, just ask. We're here to listen. But I do notice this, and thank you, Reese, and all those from DC Power. Miss Ayton has been here up on the screen for a while. Is she coming? Are we going to hear from her soon? Okay, so let's do that. Any questions so far? Okay, no questions. And we'll be looking for your statement. So Ms. Ayton, when is Ms. Ayton coming on? She's been up.
She is coming up. Let's see, Renee Bowser was not,
Okay,
she's actually next, Renee Bowser.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me? I can't see myself. Oh, let me see. Let me put start video. Good afternoon. I cannot see the time. So before you start my time, is it possible to see how the clock? I don't see any clock.
Is there any way she can see the clock? If not,
If you up at the top of your screen, do you see where it says layout on the right-hand side? Upper right?
I don't see anything that says layout.
Well, since you are, so you have 3 minutes as an SMD commissioner. We can give you a 1-minute warning. I'll do that.
Okay, I'm going to also try to, before you start, put the timer, because I just can't measure the time when I'm talking.
Yeah. I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Just a second, okay.
can you do that with everybody from now on? And I'm going to be quiet. Can you do that with everybody?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Hood and other members and staff of the Zoning Commission. My name is Renee Bowser. I'm an ANC Commissioner and ANC 4D Chair, testifying in my individual capacity today, Ward 4 DC Statehood, DC Democratic State Committee woman and member of Empower DC. I'll just try to summarize my testimony because even if I read it, it'll be more than 3 pages. What got me about this tool is that it suggests in part 1, but does not require discussion of the citywide elements and the area elements in any case submission. And the Zoning Commission offered no definition of what constitutes racial equity or racial equity analysis. And it even failed to even list in its listing of elements of the comp plan. It failed to list the framework element and the implementation element, where you find the most discussion of what racial equity is, a racial equity analysis and racial equity tool. And so the bottom line is that there are no mandates. And the same thing with part 2 of the tool. It asks only 2 broad questions that may be included in people's zoning submission. So it has no mandates, says nothing about talking to the community, and therefore, how can it be an effective action to change the trajectory of Washington, D.C., which is, since I've been here in '83, just a racist displacement of Black and brown people. But the comp plan, as opposed to the zoning commission tool presented to date, requiring nothing of developers and requiring no consultation to community, the comp plan does require real data and analysis as part of the agency's policies and investments. And the implementation element says equity is important to achieving positive outcomes with district communities. And so you got to consult the communities. And I cite that in my footnotes.
1 minute.
It requires 1 minute? Okay. The zoning commission must, in order to comply with comp plan mandates, broaden its understanding of what constitutes a racial equity analysis and devise a tool that works to reverse systemic racism and structural inequity in DC's development system. The racial equity analysis tool must be applied to every zoning decision. For example, in Seattle, Seattle requires using equity that will heavily weigh the potential to improve race and equity and close racial disparities in an area as the basis for even selecting development and planning projects, as opposed to what we do in DC. A developer wants to do something with a project, and then we just try to, I put my time, sorry for that. Seattle is saying, look at all these things as a basis for even selecting where the development and planning projects, where the district is going to put its money. Don't do it the other way around, why it's driven by developers. We have to talk to the people, look at the statistics to know what has been done. I can see it in my community here in Pittsburgh, where Black people are being driven out. We can't counter that or redress that or have restitution for people going forward. Unless we really are serious about the racial equity process and tool. I mean, the Seattle has like 200 pages about how to specifically implement these policies. We don't.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bowser. Michelle, I think I'm gonna take it from here. I appreciate you. You just call the names. Thank you, Ms. Bowser. Let's go to the next person, Michelle.
Ms. Ayton?
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Carol Ayton. I live in Ward 3, where we have a deplorable history of redlining and restrictive covenants and a significant lack of both affordable housing and racial and economic diversity. Washington, D.C. has a lot of bad history to make up for when it comes to racial equity, including even recent history. The new requirement for the Zoning Commission and other D.C. agencies to consider their decisions through a racial equity lens has the potential to break the business as usual inequity perpetuating results that have long occurred. However, in order for the Zoning Commission to play its part in remedying the past wrongs and address inappropriate racial disparities, it will need to be informed and act intentionally with an activist posture. Frankly, the questions that were submitted for public review don't come close to providing the information that the Zoning Commission would need to make appropriate decisions, let alone include any mechanisms to address identified problems such as displacement. I think the following items must be included in the approach taken by the Commission, and obviously some work would need to happen through the Office of Planning to provide some information and expertise. First of all, it's not the developer's responsibility to look through in racial equity lenses, the Zoning Commission's. And the Zoning Commission must accept that responsibility and include a process for evaluating racial equity and possible actions they should order in their regulations and include those in text amendments. Second, they need to have the data to do that. You all need to have the data to do that. It's fine for the Zoning Commission to ask developers to provide information to help inform your decisions, but the Commission must be responsible for doing the necessary analysis and will need the necessary data to do that. Importantly, the third thing is that the Zoning Commission needs to be able to take action and identify specific remedies, potentially to be used on a voluntary basis by developers, but if not, to be able to be order direct remedial actions. This is something, thank you. This is something that has not happened to a great extent before. And lastly, I think it's important to monitor outcomes. This has not come up very often, but I think it's important to see that what is being done is working, or if it's not working, what needs to be changed or improved. There's been some discussion about how to measure racial equity. And when some of those things are developed, we need to be able to measure against those with what's being done. We're all belatedly feeling our way and addressing something that is a long-standing problem. The recent amendments to the comp plan have created an impetus. We must rise to this challenge. We're not alone. Other jurisdictions have been getting in grappling with these issues too. And they're being much more aggressive than we are at the moment. Washington, D.C. should not be following their lead, but should be the leader. Thank you very much for initiating this conversation through this roundtable. And as I've indicated beyond, the results are crucial to the future of the city. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Next.
Next, you won't be able to see him, but Jamie Epstein, we can only unmute. No video. Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Sorry the video isn't working. Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Epstein, and I live at 2743 Woodley Place in the Woodley Park neighborhood of Ward 3. And I'm a member of Ward 3 Housing Justice, a grassroots group that advocates for deeply affordable housing in Ward 3 and of Empower DC. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today regarding the Zoning Commission's proposed racial equity tool. I'm fully in support of all efforts to use a racial equity lens in zoning decisions and celebrate that advancement in the comprehensive plan. I want to live in a neighborhood that reflects the full diversity of the city's residents, both racially and economically, and where the historic exclusion of people of color is no longer perpetuated. I look forward to sharing the high opportunity neighborhood in which I live with neighbors of all racial and economic backgrounds who choose to live here. And I know that that will simply not be the result of the racial equity tool this commission has proposed. The tool the Zoning Commission has proposed is woefully inadequate. It lacks the necessary substance to effect meaningful change and equitable development outcomes, and it does not meet comprehensive plan requirements. I strongly support the recommendations of Empower DC, especially those that I have listed in my written testimony, which I submitted. In addition, I urge you to adopt a tool that will consider not only the current risk of displacing Black residents, but will also take into account the historic context that has made areas west of Rock Creek Park disproportionately white and wealthy, repair the harm of past policies and actions, and advance racial equity. Develop mapping and narrative tools to research and document a community's specific history of racism in housing and land use before taking further steps to develop policy or plans. And both acknowledge this history and take actions that are informed by this research to dismantle systemic racism and barriers to fair housing and community equity across the city. To that end, I also urge you to consider the implementing tools similar to those used by the City of Seattle, Washington, that measure both the displacement risk of a project, the displacement index, and the level of opportunity in the neighborhood, the access to opportunity index, in order to ensure equitable access to all neighborhoods. In closing, I urge you to adopt a tool that includes all of the recommendations of Empower DC and that ensures that your decisions will increase the ability of all residents of DC to thrive in housing they can afford in every ward of the city. The tools should be made mandatory through a zoning text amendment, and there must be accountability and reporting of outcomes. You have the opportunity to use this moment to begin to reverse the consequences of the shameful history of housing discrimination, exclusion, and displacement in the district. Please use all of the tools available to you to ensure that your decisions truly advance racial equity in our city. Thank you.
Okay, our next panel, Cheryl Court, Deirdre Brown, Alma Gates, Laura Richards, and Nancy McWood. And 1, 2, 3, all but Laura Richards have 5 minutes.
Let me just say before Ms. Court starts, I also have her name, if my colleagues agree with me, with this task force wants to be put together, Ms. Court. So I'm just putting that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Hood, members of the commission, I'm in my 8-year-old's bedroom. I don't have a special dedicated office. I'm Cheryl Court with the Coalition for Smarter Growth. We're the leading nonprofit in the DC region based in the District of Columbia dedicated to making the case for smart growth. Our mission is to promote walkable, inclusive, and transit-oriented communities and the land use and transportation policies and investments needed to make those communities thrive. We're pleased to offer our comments on the work of the Zoning Commission in order to implement the directive from the updated comprehensive plan that requires that all zoning actions be viewed through a racial equity lens. This approach is one of the important advances of the comprehensive plan. We have discussed the Zoning Commission's proposals with our partners in the Housing Priorities Coalition, which work together to win a comprehensive plan to guide us to a more equitable, affordable, and sustainable district. I submitted testimony that restates the really helpful guidance from the implementation element that I've seen cited many other times. So I won't go through that, but I wanted to just share with you some of our observations on, we've already started working with the framework on a racial equity lens as proposed in the comprehensive plan and by the Zoning Commission when considering specific plan unit developments that we've submitted testimony on and testified for. And also wanted to note that we've already started to benefit from the newly completed planning efforts, such as the Chevy Chase Small Area Plan. This plan provided a brief historical context and racially disaggregated data, which demonstrated clear inequity by race and acknowledgement of the legacy of racial discrimination, specifically against African Americans in Chevy Chase and the district. This context will be helpful as when the commission considers future zoning actions in this area. We'd like to highlight some of our comments based on the part 2 of the racial equity analysis tool under the themes that you proposed. And so I'll just briefly talk about some of these themes. So the first one is direct displacement. We working with my partners, we have provided some additional questions as a way to frame how you might want to approach this. First of all, how does this action avoid displacement is the first question, and then describe the demographics, race, income, and other characteristics of affected residents. What is the, if there is a relocation program, what is it, and how does it, what best practices, models does it follow? How does the relocation program specifically address the needs of Black and other people of color, the specific needs of residents? And is there a right of return guaranteed? How are relocation costs covered? Is this temporary or permanent displacement? I will also just note that on the question of direct displacement, we also suggest examining how inaction can also result in direct displacement, as affordable housing proposals are often delayed or derailed through the appeals process and other ways that they are contested. Regarding housing, we suggest more details in terms of examining the kinds of things you want from an applicant to describe in terms of the housing component, how the action addresses the housing needs for households at specific income levels, 30, 40, 50, 60% median family income. What are the current and projected household size and age-related housing needs and proposed housing types for the project? Is the affordable housing rental or ownership? How does the new housing address the needs in the local neighborhood and or on a citywide scale? And then let's see, how is rental housing management, in providing high quality of living for all the residents, and providing supports for those who need additional supports, and how are we ensuring that in home ownership cases that homeowners are successful. Addressing historic exclusion, how would proposed new housing address historic, racial, and other exclusion practices? Because in fact, we have many neighborhoods where people of color, African Americans, were either disallowed from living in that community or were actually literally pushed out over time, and no longer have much of a footprint in these communities. I think of Chevy Chase documented that in the Chevy Chase Small Area Plan. In terms of transportation equity, we just wanted to note that low-income residents and residents of color are less likely to own their own personal vehicle and less able to take advantage of a parking-only transportation benefit. So we ask how we can look at more equitable transportation subsidies. Is the project just subsidizing vehicle storage, or is there an equivalent subsidy offered to residents who don't own a personal vehicle? And more broadly on transportation equity. Yes.
If you can just give us your closing thought. And
Okay.
We'll hear from you more at a later time, I'm sure.
Great. Okay. Well, we appreciate being part of this evolving process, and how we can incorporate this into all our land use decisions. And we're excited by the opportunity to learn from other jurisdictions and map out the relationship between the zoning decisions by the Zoning Commission and other agencies and higher level planning and analyses. So I'll just leave it at that. So we're excited to be part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
That's Deirdre Brown. Ms. Brown, you need to unmute.
There we go. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Deirdre Brown. I'm a third-generation Native Washingtonian, an affordable housing advocate, a Ward 3 resident, and a small business owner. I've been in the real estate industry as a realtor and a title company owner for over 2 decades. Like many of us, I've watched the gentrification and displacement, as well as lack of affordability in the district, grow to the levels that we see today. I'm speaking today on behalf of Northwest Opportunity Partners Community Development Corporation in opposition to the Zoning Commission's draft of the racial equity tool. The DC Comprehensive Plan requires racial equity analysis within DC planning and zoning by evaluating all zoning actions through a racial equity lens. The Zoning Commission's draft of the racial equity tool, as it stands today, is insufficient as a process for evaluating all actions through a racial equity lens. It does not meet the comprehensive plan requirements due to its lack of substance, and as drafted, will not lead to the meaningful change and equitable development outcomes that we need. The racial equity tool as drafted evaluates 4 topics: direct displacement, housing, physical, and access to opportunity. The corresponding questions for each topic area are too vague to be effective. Our suggestions are, at the very least, that the following 4 items be included in the racial equity tool. The first being to identify and consider past and current systemic racial inequalities by developing data tools that track and measure progress towards closing the racial wealth gap and housing affordability based on the context of the median income for Black and Brown families in target areas. By documenting historic community level inequities, we can better predict the impact of proposed projects and address the inequities during the planning stages of any new project. Number 2, clearly and distinctly identify who benefits or is burdened from a decision. A tool must be created to assess displacement risks with specific questions that are used to guide the assessment. Factors to consider when evaluating high displacement risk projects should be indicators such as race, income, level of education, percentage of renters, and housing cost burdens. The evaluation of displacement risk must include surrounding areas, not just a direct displacement site. In addition, applicants that have projects in a displacement risk area must demonstrate what steps have been taken to address displacement and advance equity before coming to the Zoning Commission for approval. This information can be provided by mandating that a racial equity and social justice impact statement is submitted by the applicant. Number 3, once a baseline is established, there needs to be a way of tracking the effectiveness of interventions and measure the progress towards the goal of racial equality. This can be achieved through data analysis as well as community review and feedback. And finally, it is imperative that any racial equity analysis that is implemented be codified through a zoning text amendment and conducted for all zoning decisions, not just contested cases. Thank you for your time.
Okay, next is Alma Gates.
Chairman Hood and members of the commission, I am Alma Gates, presenting on behalf of Neighbors for a Livable Community. Equity, a term with many meanings and definitions, is often used interchangeably with the term equality, but equity cannot be achieved until barriers are resolved. It's critical to remember that social systems aren't naturally inequitable. They've been intentionally designed to reward specific demographics for so long that the system's outcome may appear unintentional, but are actually rooted in discriminatory practices and beliefs that create barriers. Neighbors for a Livable Community has worked tirelessly to ensure institutions in their surrounding neighborhoods exist equitably and in concert with the comprehensive plan. In keeping with directives in the plan, the Zoning Commission has provided an evaluation tool to be viewed through a racial equity lens. The tool needs accountability measures, which must be intentional, concise, and enforceable. For too long, accountability has been the responsibility of the zoning administrator, who lacks qualified staff to enforce the zoning regulations. It's unrealistic to believe accountability measures will be handled differently by the zoning administrator staff when it comes to racial equity issues. If the ZC is serious about ensuring an equity lens is employed in the review of zoning applications, as opposed to more rhetoric, ZC will request that the Office of Planning provide a planning analysis outlining the racial equity impact of all set-down reports and zoning application reports, and to draft and track the measures of accountability for each case coming before the commission. NLC thanks the Zoning Commission for the opportunity to present its opinions and suggestions at this roundtable. The roundtable is a good beginning, and the public will benefit further from an opportunity to review what is being proposed prior to codification in the zoning regs. NLC strongly encourages the Zoning Commission to require OP to implement a planning analysis and to draft accountability measures based on an equity lens for all cases coming before the commission. NLC is aware that inequity exists within the public schools of the District of Columbia. At a recent at-large candidates airing, one panelist mentioned that school choice across the river is not an option for parents living east of the river because they are considered out of bounds for admittance to schools west of the river. Education is one of the most blatant examples the city has of inequality and inequity. Why are schools east of the river not on par with their counterparts across the river? How can this inequity be corrected? The Zoning Commission has an opportunity to propose that developers not bound by IZ adopt a school and work directly with the school to help remove barriers, deliver goods and needed services to ensure teachers and students have the resources they need to succeed. If education is one of the most important tools for success, that needs to be treated equitably. What can the commission do to create additional pathways for success through zoning? First Source is an example of a zoning requirement which has been treated as rhetoric. Developers must be required to hire and train unskilled DC workers through an apprentice program. Apprenticeships will broaden the workforce, provide the tools for success, and ensure a more equitable approach to hiring is available to those in need of work in the district. In closing, NLC believes direction from the comprehensive plan must be implemented equitably. The plan does not discriminate, but at the present time does not provide the kind of direction necessary for the successful implementation of equitable accountability. Now is the time for the Zoning Commission to use the equity lens to ensure its decisions are not only equitable, but address success through the implementation of a planning, analysis, and accountability measures. Thank you.
Ms. Richards has 3 minutes.
Let's make sure all these statements that they are in the record. If they're not in the record yet, Michelle, I want to make sure we get all the statements in the record. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Hood and members of the commission. For decades, the district has allowed, even encouraged, development that maintains and hardens historic patterns of racial and economic segregation. Therefore, an effective equity policy must interrupt these adverse consequences and lead to development being welcomed rather than feared as a predator. As a threshold step, the equity standards must be included in the zoning regulations as mandatory requirements, which you've already agreed to do. These standards cannot be soft-edged, impressionistic evaluation of the project, and instead must rely on measurable standards and statistical analysis. The standards must address how a project impacts the surrounding community. Housing and demographic data should be localized to DC and to the extent possible to the neighborhood at issue. The Office of Planning should be charged with making the data user-friendly to individual DC citizens. The standards must take into account that displacement takes many forms. Small businesses can be displaced, a culture can be displaced. The introduction of meaningful amounts of affordable housing into affluent, non-diverse neighborhoods can be unwelcoming and prevent inclusion of newcomers. The standards must address this circumstance as well. Steps could include preservation of existing home ownership, including tax relief beyond the current annual cap to longtime owners faced with ballooning assessments. Any household being displaced must be rehoused before construction starts on temporary or permanent housing. There should be a guaranteed right of return, or at least return on a first in line basis for displaced households, with no disqualification for credit or similar issues. If a formerly occupied vacant building is slated for redevelopment, the applicant must show that the landowner did not engage in de facto eviction of the tenants by failing to maintain the property. The district's First Source program is broken. The commission should impose requirements beyond those of the First Source law. The best effort standard for compliance must be abandoned and replaced with mandatory requirements. This roundtable begins an evolving process of revising longstanding structural inequalities. While the Zoning Commission cannot do this alone, its authority is considerable and must be exercised vigorously. And I should add that I am testifying on behalf of the Committee of 100. So I really have another 2 minutes, but I will simply conclude with what I've said. And I think the commission's on the right track, but it's really got to step up to the plate more than has been the case in the past.
Michelle, let's give Ms. Richards her other 2 minutes, please. Thank you. Ms. Richards, you
Okay, that's fine. She just registered as herself, so that's fine. That's why I said 3 minutes.
Okay, let's give her.
She may have it.
All right, let's give her other 2 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Richards, keep going.
Okay. I just want to emphasize the importance of employment opportunities as part of development. Often development is welcomed because people see more jobs coming in. And that's not the case for African Americans. We are so tired of seeing construction sites go up, including in our neighborhood. And all we see are like Hispanics workers for the most part. And there's sort of one of the developers' favorite ways of, non-complying with First Source is to funnel would-be employees into soft skills training. And I really think that like soft skills has, just become an avoidance mechanism. Another favorite mechanism is to, what do they put them into these temporary jobs that are taxpayer supported. And when those jobs end, they're out of luck. So I think that a big step in making these developments welcomed would be to make sure there's some participation in the long run for the people who live in the neighborhood. So the district seems to have some real impetus behind it this time. That's not been the case in the past. I hope that there is significant, communal will to really seriously address these problems. That's it.
Okay. Last, Nancy.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify at the roundtable on racial equity. I am testifying on behalf of Ward 3 Housing Justice, which is dedicated to creating more affordable, including deeply affordable housing in Ward 3. The Zoning Commission is asking for advice on creating a tool that links racial equity to both process and outcomes. That is the right approach, but we urge the Zoning Commission to require more information from applicants as it joins every branch of government in meaningfully ending racial injustice. The Zoning Commission requested in part for advice on how to make its evaluation of racial equity more substantive. We suggest that the tool used by applicants in the Office of Planning must be more specific and detailed to provide you with the information and context you need for a deeper dive into the link between racial equity and zoning. You must understand what opportunities or burdens people of color are facing to prevent zoning decisions exacerbating racial divisions. The second question mentioned in the roundtable announcement is how to better identify potential positive impacts and negative outcomes of a zoning action. The DC Comprehensive Plan, which has elevated racial equity in our city to both an emergency and an essential shared value, provides relevant information. The desired outcome is no division between people of color and white people. Life outcomes no longer predicted by skin color. To get there, the implementation element says you need to identify past and current racial inequities so you know what the needs of residents of color are. In a zoning context, that means applicants must use data disaggregated by race, which the Office of Planning has, to show how income, jobs, healthcare, and housing are different or the same in the area where they seek benefits or relief from zoning regulations. Information about the goals of an application or if there are featured public space improvements will not help you to address structural racism. We looked at a PUD map amendment and a modification of a PUD filed after the release of the Zoning Commission Racial Equity tool to get a sense of how applicants use the tool. In every case, applicants said there would be no displacement because zoning had not permitted housing previously. They did not go a step further and discuss the demographics of the area, what the income levels are, what the unemployment rate is, or any other factors that would be relevant to determining how a development proposal or allowing more buildable density could impact an area from a racial perspective. The intention of a zoning racial equity analysis, we believe, is to shine a light on the potential for loss of culture, loss of small and local businesses, displacement due to property tax increases, and loss of jobs. With that information, the Zoning Commission can work with applicants and stakeholders to change emphasis, add conditions, and require mitigations or interventions to ensure that racial outcomes are positive. Affordable housing was barely mentioned in these statements. The map amendment submission said that a development proposal could result in a project that would offer housing, including affordable housing, but not a word about the cost of housing in the area and whether there is a need for affordable housing. The other two submissions noted that they would comply with inclusionary zoning requirements, and one said that would make sure that some people at 50% MFI could live in the development. But there was no information on how much rent people of color who live in the area could afford to pay, or whether the area is so predominantly white that a greater percentage of affordable units is really the public benefit that is needed. Amazingly, people of color were never mentioned in any of the statements. It appears that the Zoning Commission is taking a very narrow approach to how applicants can show consistency with the comprehensive plan policies on racial equity. We urge you to examine the robust racial equity requirements for land use and development processes adopted by Boston and New York City. Our neighbor Montgomery County has also some interesting approaches that DC might consider. The goal is not to scrutinize the comprehensive plan to figure out how little applicants must do, but to figure out how, through text amendments, the Zoning Commission can add process to help it incorporate racial equity into all its actions. Thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, next panel. Chris Otten, Tanya Golash-Boza, William Jordan, Lori Winter, and Coy McKinney. Mr. Jordan and Ms. Winter are registered with organizations, so they will get 5 minutes. The others are registered as individuals.
All right, Mr. Jordan, I think your name is called first. You may begin.
Actually, Chris Otten was first.
Chris Otten. Okay, Mr. Otten, you may begin. I don't see him.
He was,
Can you see me?
he was on. Maybe he's just
Hello?
unmuted.
Okay,
Okay,
there
Mr.
we go.
Otten, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought I signed up with DC for Reasonable Development, so I don't know. It sounds like I'm only getting 3 minutes instead of 5.
You have 5 minutes, Mr. Otten. You may begin.
Okay, thank you. I'm appearing before the committee of folks who love me the most in this city. Look, my friends, you know, I've lived in the city for 22 years, and I have a lot of friends who are not in the city anymore. Particularly people of color. My Black friends, a lot of my friends are gone. They can't keep up with the rents. They can't keep up with, they're not getting the jobs. And, you know, this is all, we're talking about racial equity. It's the hot buzzword now. And I'm seeing some of the stuff happening, right? So there's applications flowing through the Zoning Commission right now that you're approving, even though we don't have a tool in place yet. And that scares me because that means continuing the status quo. 60,000 Black folks have been made gone from DC over the last 20 years of the real estate boom. 60,000. If that doesn't cause pause, which it sounds like it's finally doing, then I don't know what will. So to this pause, and I'm hoping you guys can stop the applications and approvals until a real tool is ready. This one-page PDF, that's kind of a joke, right? I know it's led to this conversation, but we got folks who are being harmed directly by these projects. Union Market, 6,000 new units at Union Market that you approved, 20 PUDs. over 40 acres. I counted. There's 10 affordable family-size units that were brokered by the Office of Planning and the Zoning Commission with the developers and giving away all those air rights. 10. Not 10%, 10 2+ bedroom affordable units. That's the harm, right? And so we're trying to move away from that. I think if we want to take this seriously, I want to see the Office of Planning look at jurisdictional, how other cities are doing this right. Because, you know, you can talk with us all day, but I want to see the Office of Planning step up and actually, you know, look at how other cities are doing this. New York has a great has a whole protocol set up. Oregon, Portland, Oregon, San Francisco. I mean, there's a lot of places that are trying to do this now and have been for a few years. But what I'm seeing here is like Holland and Knight redefine racial equity as racial equality. That's unacceptable, right? Because racial equality doesn't happen unless there's racial equity. Repairing the harms of the past, repairing the displacement pressures of the past, that's how we get to a racial equality. So we need racial equity first. They're not the same thing. I just want to give an example because, you know, I've been castigated for challenging projects at the Zoning Commission that displaced my friends and neighbors. One of those was the Adams Morgan Hotel. We're on my block where I live. And my neighbors and I organized. And we said, if you put a luxury hotel here, to the Office of Planning and to the Zoning Commission, we said, if you put a luxury hotel here, the existing natural occurring affordable housing will be displaced. We wound up settling and we won a settlement package out of that well, ultimately $2 million. Of that, we've only been paid $1 million. We bought one building with that to save 30 units for permanently affordable housing. That was what we had to do in our fight because nobody at the Zoning Commission listened. Nobody at the Office of Planning believed if you drop a luxury hotel on a block, it's going to displace people. Well, 30 people get to stay here on my block. The 30 people across the street don't. So just real quick, the property appraisers, the appraisal values of the land goes up with each one of these developments. In this case, the two buildings we wanted to buy went from appraised at 1.2 million to 6 million by the time the hotel was built. This is real. This is what these projects you approve do to neighborhoods. We're asking for the tool to be in place with the help of everybody on this call and you as the Zoning Commission and Chair Hood, I appreciate it. But we try to get this in place sooner than later because the applications are piling on right now. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Next, Ms. Boza.
Hi, good afternoon. Can y'all hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Dr. Tanya Golash Boza, address 5325 16th Street, Northwest Washington, D.C. 211. I was born and raised in that area, and I am a sociology professor. So basically my day job involves analyzing the extent to which racial equity has been not realized in Petworth, in the broader Petworth neighborhood where I grew up. So I want to talk to you all today about one aspect of the racial equity tool, because my colleagues have already shared many different other aspects of it. So the comp plan specifies that we need to take into account historical trauma and racism. So y'all might think, well, you know, we're the Zoning Commission. How can we take into account historical trauma and racism? You know, we're looking forward. How can we even account for everything that happened? What I want to point out to you is that the fact that in the Washington metropolitan area, white people have 81 times the wealth of Black people, that's not just an accident. And that actually happened because of local and federal policies. So if local and federal policies created the racial wealth gap, and if you'd like more information on that, I'd be happy to provide you with that, but I'm not gonna take up your time here. But the point I wanna drive home is that if we created this racial wealth gap with local and government policies, then we also can undo it with policies. So we have to think bigger, right? We're not gonna get to racial equity as defined in the comp plan through small measures. Like it's simply not going to happen. And let me just give you a little more context about Petworth. So the Petworth neighborhood was 100%, 99% white. And then because of policies that condoned racial covenants in that neighborhood. And then another policy came out that said, you know what, those covenants are not legal anymore. So now African Americans can move into that neighborhood, and they did. But then policies made it possible for white people to move out to the suburbs, but policies prevented Black people from moving out to the suburbs. So that's the basis of the racial wealth gap. When we go back to the neighborhood of Petworth, we think about the fact that as Black people were moving into Petworth in the 1950s and 60s and purchasing homes, right? These are people that were on their way towards the American dream, but then local policies subsequently proceeded to defund the schools and then later fund a war on drugs that led to massive displacement. So what we want to keep in mind is that Petworth was a stronghold of the Black middle class, but government policies dispossess them. So when we think about racial equity moving forward, we have to think about how can we not just stop that dispossession, but how can we recreate and reestablish a strong Black middle class? Because that's the only way that we're going to move anywhere towards diminishing the wealth gap. So any future plan to achieve racial equity in the city has to take into account the history of disinvestment in Black neighborhoods and carceral investment in Black neighborhoods. It is impossible to achieve racial equity without taking into account and providing redress for this pernicious history. Thank you.
Mr. Jordan?
Good evening, good afternoon. My name is William Jordan. I'm a resident of Columbia Heights. Have been here for almost 40 years, 35 years. I'm testifying today. I almost didn't testify because I've been so disappointed in my interaction with how the commission has treated this dynamic of racial equity and the willingness to really dive in and understand the dynamics that have played out in this city. I'll start with Columbia Heights, but I really want to reference a couple of cases. First is 7-02, which was the Donatelli case, Highland Park in Columbia Heights. As an ANC commissioner, I came before this commission not really understanding fully the process, but I raised to this commission that the city partnered with Donatelli, had used the PUD process to get out of—
Mr. Jordan, obviously,
yes?
let me just say this. I have been instructed by counsel to stop you. And what I would ask, you obviously missed my opening statement. So I would ask you to, again, to be geared towards not what's been done, not what you disagree with, because there are probably people that disagree with whatever any of us do. But I would ask you to respond to the tool, how we can improve it, and how we can perfect it in that order, or in that manner, to that point. And I greatly appreciate you following the opening statement.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I missed the opening statement. However, I will not go specifics, but the purpose of the tool, the reason I was bringing up this case is the purpose of the tool the tool must be able to see what happened in the past, what's happened recently, and evaluate that moving forward. So if I can't talk about past cases, if I can't talk about recent cases, right, and how that has impacted the people that I know, then that is the opposite of what a racial equity tool needs to do. And so that would be my comment to you all, is as well as my work with Park Morton, similar, is that the whole purpose of the racial equity tool is to make visible the people, the communities, and how projects in the past have impacted, because we have said that these projects, greater density, transit-oriented development, and all of these things have made this community better. But if you look at Ward 1, if you look at what's happening with Park Morton, the opposite is being shown, that these things are not. So a tool should be able to pull these things out. So the problem I have with the tool and what the tool needs to be able to fix is to address what you just cut me off from being able to do. I think that is the entire purpose of a quality tool, is to be able to tell the story, my story, the story of Park Morton, the story of other people in my neighborhood, the story of how the city investment has impacted. So in my case, I wasn't displaced, but my children have been, because of those policies have created the types of units and the type of an environment that my children who have gone to school, done all the things that we've asked them to do, has not created the kind of community that we need that would welcome them. So I will end, since I can't really say what I want to say, is to say that that's the fundamental flaw, is that we have to be willing to dig into these things, and the tool should guide us through this process. And that's how we move forward, is to have the strength of character to go back and look at these cases, look at the impact, look at the current cases, look at the impact, and look at what people are now saying is, in many of these cases, community benefit or community improvements, when all the evidence say these have not been community improvements if you look from a racial equity lens. So I will just submit my other comments in written form. But I'll end. If we won't dig through the thing that I'm saying we need to dig through, then the tool can't work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Call the next person, Michelle.
Lori Winter.
Hello. My name is Lori Winter. I live at 5035 12th Street Northeast in North Michigan Park. I am actually speaking today on behalf of the Washington, D.C. team of the United Church of Christ, Potomac Association Justice and Witness Action Network. This team is comprised of representatives from the United Church of Christ congregations located in Washington, D.C. As a community of faith, we are motivated by the call to address the needs of the least of these and require justice on their behalf. We welcome the opportunity to speak to the proposed Zoning Commission Racial Equity Tool. The generic questions proposed in the current tool do not reflect the requirements for racial equity as explained in the comprehensive plan. The criteria to manifest racial equity in our residential spaces must be applied not only by the Zoning Commission, but also by the Office of Planning and linked to the Department of Housing and Community Development Programming and other concerned agencies in the city accountable for housing equity. Our basic reference is from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, an alliance of government entities that has as its mission to achieve racial equity within their jurisdictions. It is our understanding that DC is a member of this organization. The Government Alliance on Race and Equity states that racial equity tools provide a structure for institutionalizing the consideration of racial equity. They do so by proactively seeking to eliminate racial equities and advance equity. They identify clear goals and objectives and measurable outcomes. These tools engage communities in the decision-making process, as Empower DC has wonderfully described. This tool must identify who will benefit or who will be burdened by the given decision. It examines the potentially unintended consequences and develop strategies to advance racial equity and mitigate the unintended negative consequences. And this tool must also contribute to developing mechanisms for successful implementation and evaluation of impact. Black and brown residents in this city are disproportionately located in the most impoverished neighborhoods and areas. The tool needs to facilitate the correction of this mismatch between income status and housing availability and other opportunities available, as has been stated through the examples from, for example, Washington State, Seattle and Washington. Boston has an interesting part of their racial equity process in that they provide a list of interventions to applicants, and they are required to implement one or more of these interventions to address displacement and advance racial equity prior to coming to the Zoning Commission for approval. It is our assertion that measurable goals need to be established for the city as a whole and also segmented in a manner that would address specific actions in given neighborhoods. For example, some neighborhoods need to increase the number of affordable units in another neighborhood may need protection from displacement for existing residents. We also feel that, did you say 1 minute?
Yes.
Okay. As Empower DC has also has already described the importance of community engagement, I won't go into that so much. The identification of impact of the decision is so important. Consider displacement risk, the displacement risk of those who live within at least a mile of a given development proposal due to the increase in tax rates. Consider the loss of community service organizations as their rents go up due to tax rates and market pressures. Consider the impact on the sense of community, which is maintained by informal norms that protect the safety of a neighborhood. Destruction of the community fabric of norms contributes to community violence. As everyone has spoken about the necessity for data, both quantitative and qualitative, both for goal setting and particularly to measure progress and accountability. We believe the process for applying a racial equity lens to decisions needs to be done thoughtfully. As noted in the statements above, there are other jurisdictions that have developed strategies to meaningfully address the issue of racial justice, each with their strengths and weaknesses. In addition to this roundtable, the Commission must thoughtfully create a meaningful racial equity tool and a transparent process by which proposals and plans are developed and evaluated. The analysis using this tool must be made mandatory through a zoning text amendment, and there must be accountability and reporting to achieve racial equity in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Mr. McKinney?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Corey McKinney. I've lived in Southwest since 2010. I'm happy that the Zoning Commission is looking into developing a racial equity tool. I hope that the tool must not give cover to the faulty and unjust belief that trickle-down housing is a path that leads to justice. To be clear, what I mean by trickle-down housing is the practice of building expensive housing and hoping that sometime in the undetermined future, prices will drop and become affordable to those who need it most or have been intentionally and historically underserved. To me, that approach is neither justice nor practical. Studies and observations of my neighborhood in Southwest show this to be false. Southwest is part of the planning area that has produced the largest number of units in the city, yet has seen its Black population decrease over 20% over the last 2 decades, while the white population has increased 157% over the same time period. The new market rate units have been priced beyond the means of average Black and brown families, and thus they cannot afford to stay in the neighborhood despite a glut of units coming online. The tool must take a much broader view of displacement. I have read and heard applicant after applicant claim that their project, usually with 8% affordability, will not displace anyone because there was no building there before. As the stats for Southwest show, there are various forms of displacement that extend past just physical that should be taken into consideration. The Zoning Commission tool must acknowledge that the housing market is segmented, meaning expensively priced units may only lower other expensively priced units and will either raise or do nothing to already affordable units. I have submitted to the record an article and a study that show this. The tool must take into consideration the median income of racial groups and the price of new market rate units, as well as the band developers use for their AMI targets. The Zoning Commission should require developers to use the lower band of the AMI, not the higher. The tool should also encourage applicants to use proven models like limited equity housing co-ops and community land trusts to not only provide long-term home ownership opportunities, but power and voice to residents and tenants. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments recommended that 75% of new units should be priced for individuals with low and moderate incomes. That's far from the 8% currently on the books or what IZ Plus requires. I hope this roundtable can be the start of the realization of equitable housing in DC. Thank you.
Thank you. The next panel, Andrea Rosen, Marlon Brown, Sosina Desta, Latoya Thomas, and Jamila White.
Shall I go ahead?
So Andrea Rosen.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Andrea Rosen. I live at 3266 Worthington.
I'm sorry, can you wait 1 second, Ms. Rosen, so we can restart the clock?
Okay.
5 minutes for Ms. Rosen, please.
Okay,
now.
I'm Andrea Rosen. I live at 3266 Worthington Street Northwest in Ward 4. Today, I represent DC for Democracy's Affordable Housing Group. DC4D is an all-volunteer grassroots organization with over 800 members. Thank you for this opportunity to provide feedback on the Zoning Commission's draft racial equity analysis tool. The draft tool displays a familiarity with equity issues, but falls well short of the comp plan's mandates, which other witnesses have cited, and I won't repeat here. Development driven by developers is not equitable development, yet the draft tool is so minimal that it gives applicants the latitude to use it in a seemingly responsive fashion without ever doing the heavy lifting to overcome inequity. For example, the draft tool is simplistic in limiting its consideration of displacement to, quote, direct displacement from a development site, although applicants have successfully used this argument before the Zoning Commission. Other jurisdictions in the U.S. doing racial equity work recognize that displacement arises from a complicated interlocking set of factors. Some governments consider areas within a quarter mile of the project site in evaluating displacement risk. Our own Office of Tax and Revenue recognizes the effect of large new market rate projects on surrounding areas in its policy of raising land assessments within at least a half-mile radius, sometimes wider, which raises property taxes, exerts pressure to maximize the zoning envelope, and in turn disperses current residents. We urge the Zoning Commission and the Office of Planning to examine the extensive racial equity tools developed by New York City, Boston, Chicago, Seattle, King County, Washington, Montgomery County, Maryland, and Louisville, Kentucky. In the meantime, here are our overarching recommendations. Number one, substantively involve vulnerable, marginalized, low-income residents in the future of their neighborhoods from the very beginning until construction is complete. 2, require racial equity analysis for all zoning decisions, not just contested cases, including map and text amendments. Map amendments are powerful drivers of change, and they can be used to sidestep community involvement. 3, standards for the Zoning Commission's racial equity analysis must be codified through a zoning text amendment, and I understand that Chairman Hood has already said that, so thank you. 4, the DC Office of Planning must develop data-rich profiles of local areas. Seattle has developed a displacement risk index that uses indicators like income, education, percentage of renters, percentage of housing cost burdened households to identify areas that are high risk for displacement. It has also developed an access to opportunity index that includes such indicators as high-performing schools, number of jobs within a 2-mile radius, access to fresh produce. Number 5, require land use applicants to identify how proposed projects will advance racial equity goals and/or exacerbate displacement. Boston requires a fulsome accounting of how a project will further goals of desegregation and inclusivity, a review of potential racial and economic changes in the area where the project is proposed, and an analysis of the proposal's potential effect on rents in the area to ensure that longtime residents will not be priced out. The Boston Planning Agency itself must use something called the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Assessment Tool to project effects of a project on residents and businesses before development plans are approved. 6, require applicants for land use permissions in high displacement risk areas to propose upfront and later implement interventions to mitigate displacement and advance housing equity. Boston has a set list of interventions that applicants must use. Number 7, track metrics from the baseline data referred to in my first point to measure progress. This is consistent with the comp plan call for OP to issue progress reports every 4 years that include monitoring data, activity, and impact information that is disaggregated by age, gender, race, and income levels to assess whether goals around inclusivity, racial equity, and resilience are met, and whether commitments in the framework element are fulfilled. And finally, develop accountability compliance mechanisms. Again, we thank the Zoning Commission for
I'm sorry, I forgot to call the 1 minute, but your time is up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Marlon Brown.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. I am Marlon Brown. I live at 4916 7th Street Northeast in DC. I'm a new transplant from Seattle, Washington. I am a racial equity consultant. And so basically what I do in a nutshell is I teach organizations and businesses how to be anti-racist. I am a product of Seattle's Race and Social Justice Initiative. I was trained by the City of Seattle to facilitate this work. Toolkits and such, have the conversations, develop ways of being accountable, et cetera. You name it, I do it. And I just want to add, as an expert in this realm of developing these racial equity tools and subsequently implementing those tools and practices, that the tool alone is not enough. The commission and subsequent organizations and support commissions and supports to housing and addressing housing situations and organizations in the city need to understand racism and how to interrupt the practice of racism. And it's one thing to just have a tool and check a box, go through a process. It's another to actually create a space that actively works to interrupt racism, to really address all that what has been shared by the previous speakers. In order to do that, folks have to have language, folks have to have an understanding that we're all operating in a system of racism. And it's not necessarily personal, but we just really have to address what's happening. This history of racism in this country, we're all operating with those things, and how do we work to really interrupt that? So in addition to the tool, and the tool needs to be developed to have the outcomes that everyone has been pleading for in so far, you have to build the environment to allow such conversations and details to be addressed. There's a reason why people have been complaining about housing situation in DC, and the flight of Black and brown folks from the city based on what is new racism, just raising the rates of the cost of living in a particular area. So, being able to talk about that and have the language, the common language to talk about those will be needed, and as well as the tool, which is a set of questions to make sure that, the most impacted and the most marginalized among us are being addressed when we're making decisions. All of those need to come into place. I just wanted to add that also needs to be part of this work, is building the infrastructure, building the environment of the commission to be able to facilitate the conversations that are necessary to fulfill what everyone has asked of the commission. Thank you.
Michelle, and I want to ask Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, if you can come back a moment, I want to ask you a question. First, do we have his statement with the example of some of the questions or some of the things we should look at? Did you supply a written submission or something for us to look at?
I haven't. I kind of got word about this roundtable about a week or two ago, and I just wanted to.
I want you to know that I do want you to know that our folks have been in touch with folks in Seattle. I hear people talking about Seattle, New York, Montgomery County. We've been in touch with all of them. So I do know there are other parameters, but it sounds like you have a wealth of knowledge, and I am very interested in tapping your brain. So I don't know if you don't mind. I don't know if you're willing to give us some of those questions or some of those things you think we can do to help perfect. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. Questions that we should ask where the rubber meets the road, and instead of talking about it, apply it and make sure it happens. That's where I'm trying to get. I'm not an expert and consultant like you are, but that's where I'm trying to go.
Yeah, I think it's a process. I participated as a community group for Seattle Public Schools to develop not only their policy but the equity tool for their decision making. And so, if you haven't gone through that process, that included for those voices in the room, so that your tool is specific to what DC needs. What we did in Seattle, what we did in King County, I'm a product of King County. I came out of King County. I was part of the leadership of racial equity in King County. So that's where I kind of cut my teeth. And so, I've been in these conversations.
You're kind of going in and out.
Oh, okay.
You're going in and out, and that's unfortunate because I think I want to really hear what you have to say, and I want to hear what everybody has to say, but you're going in and out, but you have the expertise. If you could submit something and make sure that the office has your email, so I would like to tap your brain if you don't mind.
Yeah, I could definitely do that. Yeah, and I can give you more. I'm at a hotel, so I'm trying to, do too many things at one time, but I can absolutely do that.
And I will tell you this, Mr. Brown, the zoning commission, a lot of people give us a lot more authority than we have some, but we have parameters. There are some things I want to talk to my legal counsel and find out how far we go. I do that quite a bit, but I would like to, I don't know, I'm sure others hopefully will be interested as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Okay, Michelle.
Okay, Ms. Dusto's not on, so we'll go to Latoya Thomas.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this evening. Again, my name is Latoya Thomas. I am principal and founder of Brick and Story, which is a Ward 7-based consulting practice focused on intentional stakeholder engagement and creative storytelling practices focused on the built environment space. Today, I am here speaking on behalf of HAND, better known as the Housing Association of Nonprofit Developers, through my role as their Housing Indicator Tool policy consultant. For background, HAND is a nonprofit membership association comprised of over 450 organizations, including nonprofit and for-profit developers, as well as architects, general contractors, lenders, and service providers, to collaborate in the production and preservation of affordable housing in the capital region, which obviously includes DC, Baltimore, Richmond, and Northern Virginia, and Prince George's and Montgomery counties. Through education, engagement, and regional advocacy, HAND builds the capacity of its diverse membership to support the development of sustainable communities for individuals and families at all income levels. HAND is also a member of the Housing Priorities Coalition, which includes organizations like the Coalition for Smarter Growth and Enterprise Community Partners, and that group was formed to help guide the updates to the comprehensive plan. Beginning in 2021, HAND introduced the Housing Indicator tool to the region as a way to track our region's progress towards meeting our affordable housing production targets. Aside from the annual review of production progress, central to the tool is its focus on racial equity and the role that housing and more broadly effective and thoughtful development plays in creating opportunity for social and economic mobility. We all know the many ways in which zoning and land use policies have prevented many people, particularly people of color, from accessing housing and, as a result, other resources such as quality schools, parks, groceries, and retail. We see the Zoning Commission's racial equity tool as a clear first step in beginning to right many of these historic wrongs that still permeate today. HAND supports the use of the racial equity tool to achieve greater equity through future land use and development decisions. Additionally, based on our review of the tool in partnership with other organizations in the Housing Priorities Coalition, we recommend the following enhancements to ensure that the tool is truly meeting its intended purpose. Number one, be specific in the questions that are asked and ask for detailed explanations. For example, when we look at whether or not a project is causing displacement, let's clearly define what we mean by displacement. And if we're talking about temporary or permanent relocation that's planned as part of a redevelopment, ask developers for explanations of the intended approach so that we better understand how families will be affected and impacted in the short and long term. Number two, when we look at housing opportunities being created by future developments, it's important to get clarity on income mix. The district has made affordable housing a priority, and at HAND, we are deeply focused on ensuring that the production pipeline for affordable housing units, particularly for those at the low and middle income bands, is met as quickly as possible, since we know that is where the greatest need and uncertainty lies. How does future development address the incorporation of 30, 50, and 60% AMI units, for example? And third, and last but not least, the goal of new development is not only to improve the existing urban fabric, but also to create opportunities today that ideally create opportunities for the future as well. This paradigm carries through not only to housing, but also to the many other supporting uses that accompany many larger scale developments, such as retail, green space, and art and cultural spaces, which are key to ensuring high quality civic life. The racial equity tool can evaluate if proposed uses create opportunities that both future and existing residents can benefit from, as well as ensure that spaces that are designed reflect a diverse representation of the city's population and welcome people from all walks of life to engage with them. To close, we applaud the Zoning Commission for starting to develop the racial equity tool. And we see this as progress towards achieving the type of equitable development that so many of us have been fighting for so long. We encourage you to be bold in your questioning of projects that come to the Commission for review and to leverage the tool to ensure that new development creates equitable opportunities for all residents. And thank you.
Okay, Ms. White, are you representing the full ANC or just speaking as an individual?
Representing the commission.
Okay, so you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for providing this opportunity to come in front of you all and for prioritizing racial equity. I am Jamila White. I am the ANC Commissioner for Single Member District 8805, and I have the pleasure of joining you all from Anacostia, what I consider the heart of the city, from Freedman's Land, right across from Frederick Douglass House. I'm also the chair of ANC 8A. Adrienne Marie Brown reminds us that we are living in someone else's imagination, that the world as we know has literally been created. For me and many of my neighbors, it sometimes feels like a nightmare instead of someone else's imagination. I'm going to try to be additive and not repeat too much that has been spoken, but so many of my fellow Washingtonians have already described the current conditions in which we face. And it's a little bit difficult for me personally to reconcile because DC, we're the nation's capital, a symbol of hope, of democracy, of people power, freedom, undoubtedly the most powerful city in the world. We are here. A place that was home to First Nation people and a refuge for Black people that has turned into a hub of Black excellence, culture, and history. But there's a tension here and a contradiction when we think about what true democracy looks like, because equity and equality are both cradles of democracy and tenets. Since 1950s, DC has been dubbed Chocolate City because of our unique Black culture and that our unique culture that has been infused with the Black community and Black culture. However, rapid gentrification over the last 2 decades has fueled Black displacement and removal. The Black population has decreased from 60% in the 2000s to around 47% that it is today. The erasure of Black DC has been long and ongoing. And we have an opportunity to really not just right past wrongs, but repair past wrongs. And when we think about racial equity, the core tenets and principles, sorry, everyone, I'm getting some work done in my house. The core tenets and principles of racial equity are about justice, inclusion, and belonging. And all too often, my community, we don't find out about projects until after it's too late, after it's been decided for. We're not at the table. And yes, the ANC does have great weight, but that's in some instances. And one of the opportunities that we do have is to be bold and to be transformational. And that's really ensuring that the community has a true seat at the table, and that throughout this process, there's shared power. Because right now, the community, we don't have the power in the decisions that happen, especially when it comes to development in our communities. So this not only a racial equity tool, but changing the process, the relationship, so that communities are included from the beginning and not as an afterthought or not as a checkbox. Its tools that can be implemented to make sure that these happen. For instance, some folks have mentioned the CBAs over and over in an earlier testimony, but we all know that most commissions are not equipped to negotiate with developers and their lawyers on a CBA. There's no enforcement mechanism, there's no accountability mechanism, there isn't even a real tracking system. And so we're already at capacity, we're already at a lower advantage with the great weight that we're giving. This is an opportunity to change that. This is an opportunity to say we're going to share power with the communities, because after all, you all are here to serve us. You know, I'm here to serve us. We're here to serve us. And it's about making sure the community has an equitable and inclusive voice. And like someone mentioned before, I'm a small business owner here in Ward 8, and I run a racial equity and social justice impact organization. And we work with communities on equitable development. And that takes time. And that takes also getting close to the communities. And that can't be done through WebEx midday webinars. That has to be going out to the communities, meeting us where we are. Those who are closest to the problem should be closest to the solution, that we know that. And that's really not happening at all. So making that a core part of development processes, especially in communities east of the river, where we know we're getting the next wave of gentrification. I know, and my neighbors know, that Anacostia will be, if it's not already, the most gentrified part of Ward 8, and that is escalating. Houses down the street are starting at $800,000. We've already reached the $1 million price range in Anacostia. People feel, we feel it. People are scared. They don't want to be forced out. They stayed here through the 90s, through the different epidemics and the different threats on Black life that has happened. And we want to stay.
I'm sorry,
But there's an
I missed your
invisibility
1
to
minute.
it.
Your time is up.
Thank you. And I just ask that you center community in everything you do. And thank you all for the time.
Okay. Our next panel, Alex Baca, Eleanor Noble, Todd Ewing, Wanda Thompson. I did not see her earlier. Let me just check. Yeah, I don't see her. Gina Bullitt. Let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Paul Johnson. Is that just 4, Paul, or 5? Okay, good. So Alex, you can go first.
Good evening. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to the Commission for holding this hearing. I submitted written comments on behalf of Greater Washington, where I served as the DC Policy Director, and also am in agreement with some of the suggestions provided by the Housing Priorities Coalition. I'm going to use my evening tonight to riff on some of the contents that have come up tonight, just because I am going later in the evening and I can. We've talked a lot about community engagement. I appreciate that this roundtable is working as designed and generating discussion about that. I always have a lot of questions about who the community is and who can show up or who wants to show up to talk about development decisions. Well, I love talking about development and zoning so much that it's my full-time job. Many people just want where they live to cost less or be of higher quality or be closer to the things that they need to and want to do and don't want to have to write 3-minute statements to the zoning commission about it. I also don't think that they should have to do that in order to access dignified, safe housing that they can afford. I think often that one ANC commissioner, which is our tiniest level of government here, represents 2,000 people. There is no way that anyone, even with infinite resources, could accurately understand what 2,000 people, the smallest constituency in the district, would want. But, you know, one thing that I think that can help a lot in terms of having meaningful community engagement and input is actually having better output from some of the bodies that are charged with doing this work. You know, we like to think that hearing from the community will result in more equitable outcomes. And I actually honestly believe it will, since we don't do a great job of that right now. I also just want to note that a lot of times people are more motivated to show up by really negative emotions and want to protect their interests. Clearly, our existing system is not working well for the people who have been most impacted by growth and development. And centering them is really, really critical. But I also don't think that that centering should come with a cost, and expecting people to show up is exacting a cost upon them. Data will help considerably with this, and I appreciate OAG's presentation on the tools in use in other jurisdictions. While I'm in support of the development of a tool, happy to talk about, you know, what we think works and what doesn't. That's in my testimony with some specific recommendations to improve the tool itself. I do feel like the Zoning Commission put out an outline, not a draft, and is kind of asking those of us testifying tonight to functionally write its draft for it. And maybe that's out of a well-intentioned desire to hear from the community before doing anything. And while I get that, it doesn't feel particularly equitable to not tell the public what the Zoning Commission as a body considers racially equitable zoning, or what it thinks is paramount in preventing displacement, or who constitutes a community and who doesn't. I think those are really, really important things to know, not just for me, not just for my organization, but because if we do want to center people who have been most negatively impacted by growth and development, they need to know where the bodies with power, including the Zoning Commission, currently stand. I don't know if we could get to a better future if we don't know where we are currently. You know, of course, Gigi Wash's future is that, you know, there should be, as a default, the aggressive production of subsidized income restricted housing, particularly where it has not been built much in the past. But ultimately, I would like to hear what the Zoning Commission thinks would help make development more racially equitable, quite frankly, more than I'd like to be testifying on what my organization thinks. So I look forward to some concrete stuff. That's not a one-pager. I hope that my comments, I hope that everybody's comments are helpful in that draft crafting. And I think this is going to take a lot of work to get right. But I do think it's very meaningful, and I am appreciative that the requirements of the comp plan are being carried out, since we've worked extensively on that. So thank you.
Okay, next is Eleanor.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Eleanor Noble. I live at 3924 5th Street Northwest in 20011, and I'm a research analyst at the Urban Institute and a core member of the Land Use Lab at Urban. So the views I express today are my own and should not be attributed to the Urban Institute, its trustees, or its funders. My testimony today will outline evidence and examples for 3 key considerations for the Zoning Commission while you are finalizing this data equity tool. So the first is the importance of using data to target historically exclusionary neighborhoods, then how to account for a lack of equitable representation in zoning decision-making, and finally, an overview of data collection methods to ensure an equitable distribution of benefits from zoning and development. So the Zoning Commission's racial equity review should include an analysis of exclusivity at the regional and neighborhood levels to determine these areas' responsibility for providing housing for the future. Last year, over 100 civil rights, community organizing, and affordable housing advocacy organizations wrote to the Biden administration explaining that the top priority for combating structural racism using zoning was to focus zoning reforms on areas that actually exclude low-income people of color in practice. So project-level equity analysis data is really key for researchers and policymakers to tell if neighborhoods are accurately categorized as exclusionary and if individual low-income residents of color within these exclusionary neighborhoods experience displacement following a reform or subsequent development. The Zoning Commission's racial equity review processes should also consider analyzing the diversity of public participation in zoning decision-making. So research has shown that in many jurisdictions, particularly in historically exclusionary neighborhoods, homeowners, high-income residents, and white residents are more likely to participate in public meetings regarding zoning. There is still a staggering—
1 minute left, even though it says 2, 3, you have 1 minute.
Thanks, yeah. There's a staggering 22% Black-white racial homeownership gap, and DC residents of color are likely not fairly engaged and represented in decision-making. So in 2020, the Urban Institute partnered with Alexandria, Virginia to craft a set of accessory dwelling unit regulation recommendations. We briefed them on the diversity of those engaged to ensure that final recommendations were not driven by unrepresentative input. The Land Use Lab is also currently working on filling a large research gap about sociodemographic diversity in zoning commissions and boards of zoning appeals across the country. So look out for that later this year. The Zoning Commission should also consider collecting data and weighing the racial distribution of benefits from zoning reforms at the individual, development, neighborhood, and regional levels. Evidence about the beneficiaries of new development is really mixed, and it depends on a variety of factors like the quality, type, and size of unit built, and of course, local market conditions. And folks have outlined the Seattle example. I know you're connected with them, so I'll skip over that. So the district can be a leader in combating racial inequities in zoning.
Your closing thought, please. You're over time.
Yeah, no, I can finish up. Just 3 things to recommend: targeting those historically exclusionary areas, being transparent about the diversity of residents engaged in zoning processes, and tracking who actually benefits from development. Thank you.
Thank you, and we have your submission, so thank you. All right,
Great,
Ms. Schilling.
Yes, next is, I'm sorry, Todd Ewing.
Hello and thank you. My name is Todd Ewing. I live in Northeast Boundary across the river in Washington, D.C., 5711 Eade Street, Northeast. I'm really just a neighbor citizen who moved here in 2014, an intergenerational family. And as I began to engage with the Civic Association and learn about the neighborhood, I would listen to people come to present, developers. I don't know if anybody from the Zoning Commission ever came. And it seemed like all of the residents here, most of them, were always angry at the people that were coming. And I was always wondering why. And they were always saying, well, they never listened to us. And I thought, well, can that really be true? And as I sat in meetings over and over and listened to people come and make promises and then see them not fulfilled, and then as I walked in the neighborhood and I saw these buildings go up, and everybody said, well, we didn't even know it was rezoned. We didn't even know these buildings were going up. The people that came here and talked to us said that we would have a voice in this. And so we'd see building after building go up. And I know that this is about a race equity tool, but I think part of it is going to have to be rebuilding trust, because this tool somehow built in has to have some way, because there's so much distrust. I know there is over here. And I feel like if we're going to be effective in any kind of a tool, how do we make it user-friendly? How do we make it person-friendly so that people can regain trust with the Zoning Commission and feel like there's a connection and that the Zoning Commission really does care about them and it's not lip service? I know in our area right now, for example, when I say we don't have voice, I think there's close to 150 units going up in a 2 or 3 block area. We are an under-resourced community. We don't have grocery stores, we don't have jobs, we don't have mental health services, we don't have recreation facilities. And so if we have 150 units going up in a couple block area, what are the people going to do? Where are they going to shop? Where are they going to recreate? And I think these are things that have been brought up before in the past, but haven't seemed to be listened to. So I guess my point is, even though this is a story, and I know you don't want stories of the past, I think it's about an issue of having a tool, but also having a process that's partly about rebuilding trust with the community. I hope that this tool works. I'm grateful that it's happening. And I just want to thank you for listening to me. This may not be totally coherent, but it's more like the feeling of neighbors in this neighborhood and what I think has to happen with this tool. So thank you for hearing me out.
Next is Ms. Thompson.
Okay, good evening. I'm Reverend Dr. Wanda K. Thompson, and I am a native Washingtonian. I have lived in the Anacostia area now for nearly 40 years, and I grew up in Ward 7 area of the city. I'm here today to say that the racial equity tool as currently proposed is not sufficient. I don't believe it goes far enough. If it's not modified and adjusted, it's not going to achieve the goals intended. And in addition, it doesn't adhere to comp plan requirements. One of the major concerns I have, and I really want to focus on this, I did submit my testimony, is the need for engagement of the community. I think often people say community engagement, but I think the tool really needs to look at it. And just like with this meeting and many other meetings, including ANCs and civic associations, residents are usually put at the tail end of the process, so that in some ways we are punished and don't always get to give our feedback. And so I think it's important that a tool would look at how much of community input has really been included in decisions that are made. Development decisions should not be made without input and feedback from those affected and impacted. Such engagement must be purposeful, deliberate, and intentional. And to that point, an analysis should be done to address racial equity in all zoning decisions. This should be outlined explicitly in text amendments. Prevention of the displacement of residents is another critical concern that I have. And who is at potential risk of displacement by development should be analyzed so that displacement can be prevented or mitigated. Affordability is always discussed, but what is needed is deep affordability. Otherwise, those at the lower end of the economic scale would not be available to access or obtain housing and other opportunities. And the impact of this will be that the racial wealth gap will be increased, as others have talked about. The demographics of the area, benefits to and opportunities for the community, displacement risk, real and deep housing affordability are factors that should be considered, as well as housing availability for families and access to employment opportunities must be part of the racial equity and development tools. And I hope that you will also look at the vacancy rates that are in the city as well too with development. There are many, many developments that have high vacancy rates, even though the city says that we need more housing. Some of those vacant units could be used to house others. And I think tools should be, the tool ought to also address the vacancy rate as well too. And also, and I'll conclude with this, residents selling their homes in different parts of the city, it's location, location, location. Residents don't always get the same price that you might get in more affluent areas. So that needs to be part of the tool too. I thank you for your consideration, and I hope you'll consider all the input from community advocates. Thank you.
Gina?
Hello?
We can hear you.
I'm muting another computer. Okay. My name is Gina Billette. I've lived in Ward 7's northeast boundary neighborhood for the last decade. I've seen firsthand how development doesn't work and repeatedly harms working class Black communities like ours. I appreciate that you have come up with a racial equity tool and you're seeking our input, but the tool must go so much further. The BZA and zoning commission process is not accessible to regular folks. It's skewed to benefit developers and their lawyers. I have a very flexible schedule, but to participate in BZA matters. This past year, I had to cancel and reschedule work. That's not feasible for many of my neighbors. In addition, the tool needs to address the inequitable dumping of service housing and homes into low opportunity communities, whether they're defined as CBIFs, group homes, rehabilitation homes, short-term emergency housing. Ward 7, we do our part, and we do the part of affluent communities like wards 2 and 3. And we do it all with far less resources. And that needs to be really scrutinized and looked at by your board. 3, the tool somehow needs to analyze the housing to economic development ratios and metrics in each community in the district, and then go about approving development in our communities, particularly our low-income Black communities, that improve those metrics. Such as in Northeast Boundary, we've been promised so much economic development, but we only get housing. None of the economic development promises have come through. We're still waiting on a grocery store. I'm sure you're well aware. But we have, well before we'll ever have a grocery store here, we have 2 large apartment buildings going in that were able to come in, overshadow homes, and not have any local approval. You need to go back a period of at least 10 years and review the rate to which variances are granted against local ANCs, civic associations, and the community majority input in working class Black communities versus those of affluent white communities. And then upon analysis, create protections that prioritize community voice in low-income Black communities. Also, base approvals for affordable housing, especially those of large buildings, on comp plan target goals. We're all for affordable housing. Everybody needs a place to live. But you'll find in Ward 7 that we always exceed our goals, but affluent communities remain unaccountable for repeatedly not doing their part.
She obviously can't hear me. Ms. Bullock, can you give us your closing thought, please?
And then stop back bad actors. This past year, I watched a developer and his agent lie to neighbors, lie to local officials, come and lie to you, and still get approved. The promises they made to get approved, of course, to date, they haven't followed through on that.
Ms. Bullock.
Ms. Bullock. Ms. Bullock.
Our communities and get approved by the Zoning Commission and BZA. And
Ms.
most
Bullock.
importantly, spend more time.
Yeah, let's take it down. You can't hear me. And because somebody called and explain to her why we did that, because her time has been up. I've been trying to get her attention. So let's go to the next person, please.
Ruby. Ruby Staggerwald. Yes. I'm sorry. Mr. Johnson is next. I'm sorry. Then Ruby.
Mr. Johnson, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. I can see you very well. All right. How about me?
Just making sure. Go right ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. Is that all right? Okay. Thank you so much. I am a Ward 4 resident in Petworth and Grant Circle in Southern Ward 4. I am an ANC commissioner as well in ANC 4C. I, however, am speaking in my capacity as a resident and as a elected of SMD 4C07. I'm also affiliated with Empower DC, and my colleagues and I have done endeavored quite a bit on analyzing the racial equity tool. And I want to say that I appreciate you, Chairman Hood, and your forward-looking approach. And I'd like to encourage that. We're very much looking forward to being a part of the effort to codify the analysis tool, make it data-based and metric-based. And I think that there's a broad base of expertise to draw from on this call, whether it's national experts, whether it's folks within the Empower DC orbit, whether it's my dynamic ANC colleagues in Anacostia. I think there's a lot to draw from here, and I pledge myself as well to be involved in that effort to really make this meaningful, to follow the law, to have data and have outcomes that consider into zoning cases to make it development equitable. I also like to make a point about the synthesis of multi-agencies within the district. There's snippets of racial equity, mentions of racial equity in multiple agencies like the like DOEE, for example, in Department of Transportation, DDOT. There needs to be better synthesis between those agencies and between OP so that the cases and decisions of the Zoning Commission can be meaningful and impactful. I also want to make a point about advisory neighborhood commissions. There's been, I know we can't reference particular cases, but I've had experience voting on cases where racial equity was mentioned. And I think that prosaic pronouncements of racial equity goals don't account for, as I said, metrics. And I think that ANCs need to perhaps have some sort of mandates to figure that into their analysis as well. Because although it's hyperlocal and there's 2,000 constituents, there are a lot of filtering of filtering of projects and filtering in terms of notice and filtering in terms of just intellectual curiosity and due diligence about what are the impacts of racial equity when analyzing how to vote on a case. And I've had that experience on a planned unit development within my ward that was in front of my ANC as well this year. And I think it's very important that ANCs uphold that duty. So again, thank you, Chairman Hood. Thank you to your colleagues. I appreciate your deep roots in Washington, D.C. and your commitment to this issue and the span of what you've seen over your breadth of experience doing this work. And we look forward to working together to make this a meaningful tool to have development equitable in the district. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I want you to know that I put your name down too on my list. So thank you. See where we go from here.
Okay. On this panel is Ruby.
Okay, Ms. Stella. Who's next?
I'm Ruby Steiger.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm Ruby Steigerwald. I live at 1925 Bunker Hill Road Northeast, which is in Ward 5. And, you know, I'm just a resident and I'm really so appreciative of all the expert testimony that's been given here today. And I certainly don't have anything to add, except just to be another voice saying that for this tool to really make a difference, it needs to have all the things that people mention, you know, qualitative and quantitative data. It needs to be legally binding. I'm just frustrated and heartbroken by what I see in the development of DC, and we got to turn this train around. And DC, as the nation's capital, could and should be a leader in the nation for really developing and creating racial equity. And the last thing I want to say is that participation. So when you talk about, you know, developing, I don't know, forms and metrics of participation, I really agree that it can't just be the ANCs. And there are a lot of organizations in DC that can help get out the word and get people organized to be able to give input into zoning actions that are coming up. And a lot of those organizations were represented here today. And so I just really hope that the commission will take advantage of all the experts that have been here today and really make this a tool that's, you know, that you can be proud of.
Thank you. Next panel, Georgette Higgins, Sabrina Rhodes, Lane Freeman. I did not see that name in the list of attendees. Lydia Edwards and Nathan Fleming. Rose Knox. I did not see that one either. Allison Ewing. See if that we get 5 there.
Or 2 of those names that are on, but I can only unmute them.
Okay. All right. So first, Georgette, you're first.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Wonderful. All right. My name is Georgette Higgins, and I reside at 318 59th Street Northeast in Ward 7. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and have been a DC resident for the last 10 years. I currently work for the federal government as an analyst with a background in political science, public administration, and I work in various aspects of diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility. With respect to the racial equity analysis tool and the related comprehensive plan that's forthcoming, as you continue to develop the tool, please consider gathering a group of experts to strategically develop this tool. As you do this, define racial equity and leverage a framework that includes inclusion, which is a key component for the analysis. Have you conducted root cause analysis? And if so, please consider that key information and make the results publicly available before leveraging the tool. Have you identified and addressed why and how, for example, Ward 7 and Ward 8 residents and neighborhoods have resulted in the current state of deterioration with respect to poverty, blight, prostitution, and crime, and make this information publicly available? Have you defined key nodes of concern for the tool, like attractive affordable housing units, mixed community developments, high quality job opportunities, liquor stores, community facilities for children under 18, and food access, and then conducted access mapping analysis to better understand what all wards have, then do a more targeted approach to address the results. Consider using focus groups with respect to marginalized groups to collect much needed qualitative analysis and information, as all residents have varying capabilities for commenting, such as the elderly, folks with disabilities, etc. So as you do this, please again allow the public to engage and inform your process. When I tried to find this information on Google, I could not find this information. Please put this on a site where we all have access to this information publicly. This tool is needed urgently. Can we please set deadlines? We need deadlines for completion. As I look through the Deanwood 2008 plans, as compared to the 2021 comprehensive plan, many of the goals are still the same. They just roll over. So can we please have ways in which we're measuring our progress and put this information publicly available so that we as citizens can track it and also inform the process? Are you taking the interests and needs of the citizens seriously? Please, during this time, if you need to go door to door, I would love to see you all come door to door and ask us for civic engagement. With 7 seconds left, I appreciate the opportunity to comment, and I look forward to hearing more about how you plan to use this tool. I yield my time.
Thank you, Ms. Higgins. I do want to comment to you. I'm looking through, do we have your written submission of those points that you brought up?
No, I just got told this information.
Could you submit that? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Rhodes?
Hello, Chairman Hood and everyone on this call. My name is Sabrina Rhodes. I live at 1854 Central Place Northeast, Unit 2, Washington, D.C., 2002. I'm an ANC commissioner here in 5D01, Ivy City. I'm a resident of Ivy City and a Washingtonian. I'm also an organizer with Empower DC. First, I don't want to go over everything that everyone said about the racial equity analysis, but I would like to talk about the meaningful engagement, community engagement. It should be early in the process. And also, we shouldn't rely on postcards and door hangers. Listening sessions are great. And I know, Chairman Hood, you said early on you want solutions. We can't come up with solutions like overnight, but in-person and virtual meetings, listening sessions, engaging conversations like this roundtable instead of it being like a hearing. Also diverse participation. Everyone should be at the table and everyone who's interested in restoring their communities. We also want to continue to do the research. Some cities were stated here, whatever works, we need to look into those avenues and make sure that we follow suit. We also want to use the elements of the racial equity analysis to help direct the creation of small area plans, such as here in Ivy City, we getting ready to start planning for our small area plan. And the whole entire community will be involved. We don't want to make development of expensive housing and to dilute the power of the working class community or push and price residents out of our neighborhoods. We don't want to make that a thing. Finally, our community should be sustainable and developed in a way to minimize displacement and decrease sacrifice zones, polluting industries and toxins, which we're going through here in Ivy City. Developers should be required to use these tools to identify past inequities and identify whether demographics of a community has changed from 10 to 20 years ago, like some of the folks mentioned earlier. Also, the question, what has changed and why, should be explained in full with metrics showing investment, disinvestment, kinds and levels of development, environmental impacts caused by industrial land uses, available and affordable housing, resources and recreation, accessible transportation, mortality rates, and ADA accessibility. Thanks for allowing me to speak, and you all have a good day.
Thank you, Commissioner Rhodes. Michelle, about how many more people do it? Does it? My colleagues need a 5-minute break.
I'm sorry?
I was saying that my colleagues need a 5-minute break. Okay, all right, we can keep going.
That's not a whole lot more. Mr. Freeman?
Good evening. I'm Lance Freeman. I'm a professor of city and regional planning and sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts based on my experience with New York City's racial equity ordinance, which was adopted last year. My brief comments will focus on the methodology behind racial equity analyses. Concepts like racial equity, displacement, and even affordable housing are multifaceted and do not always lend themselves to easy measurement. It might therefore be helpful for the Commission to clearly define how things like displacement, impacts on racial equity, and even affordable housing should be measured. Based on my experience in New York City, here are some steps that might help make the process more transparent and tractable. First, make data available to facilitate the types of analysis that the Commission would like to see. In New York, the Departments of City Planning and Housing Preservation and Development created a data portal that disaggregates demographic and economic data by race at the neighborhood level. You might also recall that during the Obama administration, when HUD asked localities to develop affirmatively furthering fair housing plans, they also created a affirmatively furthering fair housing data tool that facilitated such analyses. Additional steps that you could take would be to make sure the portal includes census block group or census tract data that's disaggregated by race from the American Community Survey. The data portal could also include data on the availability of affordable housing from sources such as HUD's Picture of Subsidized Housing, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Database, and other sources that would allow developers to identify affordable housing in a specific study area. You could also provide local employment data from the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics database that's produced by the Census Bureau. I would also suggest you consider measuring indirect displacement in addition to direct displacement. Although difficult to measure, you can take into consideration the availability of affordable housing, the proportion of households that are renters, and recent trends in housing and demographic patterns that would suggest how vulnerable the local population is to indirect displacement. And finally, you might ask developers to articulate specifically how does their proposed development help further the goals of racial equity. If you clearly articulate what those goals are, you can ask developers to explain how the development helps the district achieve that goal. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Let's add 2 minutes to Mr. Freeman. Mr. Freeman's from an organization. Add 2 minutes and you can continue, Mr. Freeman.
Oh, I don't have that much to say because I thought I only had 3 minutes. I would just
2 more. Well, in that case, I got questions for you if you finish.
Okay, sure.
Okay. So you mentioned now what organization are you with? First of all, do you reside in District of Columbia?
I do not. I do not. Okay. I was made aware of the of this hearing, and given my experience in New York, I thought I would just share my experiences, and it might be helpful to you all. So that's my connection.
So let me just tell you, the reason I asked you that question was because accessibility. I wanted to make sure I could reach back out to you and get some of your knowledge. So since you're not, I would ask that maybe you could, if you didn't mind helping us. And I hear people say we got to write, but there's some things that do's and don'ts that we can and cannot do. But anyway, I need you, if you don't mind, in your time sometime to kind of help us. That's kind of what I'm asking for. But in New York, New York has a planning commission, correct?
They do.
Do you know of any other jurisdiction, and I've heard this over the years, that is kind of unique like the district? We have a planning office. We don't have a commission. I know there were some advocates for a planning office here in the city. Like I know my friends in Prince George's County who I communicate with, they have planning commissions. Do you think that and I'm not advocating for a planning commission or not, but I'm saying, do you think that some of the things that I've heard you mention, that advocacy, a lot of the things that engagement happens on the front end. I'm hearing people say engagement, but when in DC, Mr. Freeman, when people come down and testify, a lot of times they have been working with developers for 2 years or 2.5, 2 years, a year and a half before they even come to the zoning commission. So a lot of times we get what the planning office, what the ANCs, what community folks have put together. And when you've been working on something as a community person for 2 years, for me, I hate to dismantle what a community's put together, because when I see it, I believe that they have worked on. So I'm trying to figure out how that tool, everybody's talking about the zoning commission, great. but how that can also be used in those discussions early on before it even gets here. And I think that's one of the things in DC Empower mentioned. I'm not going to solve it all by myself. None of us are. The commission's not going to solve it all by themselves. This stuff has been going on for years. But how do we get it, as some people said, on the front end? Because sometimes by the time we get it, it's 2 years later. So I don't know if that's really a question. Maybe that's me just trying to figure things out.
Yeah, well, one of the things in New York, what they did, as part of the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Plan, they developed this Where We Live plan, which outlines, steps to be taken to achieve a more equitable city. And so when creating the racial equity tool, they were able to use that as a framework to guide, what would be an equitable type of development. So, for example, building more affordable housing in neighborhoods that have traditionally been fairly exclusionary. That's just one item. And so when someone proposes something that's going to require approval by the Planning Commission, they have to articulate, well, we have this list of goals and the Where We Live plan. How is this proposal consistent with that? And so, the plan was, the racial equity tool was only adopted last year, so it's kind of early to tell. But, hopefully what will happen when people get together and developers and the types of folks you mentioned, when they get together and work on these plans, they'll be, the front end work will have already been done as part of the process of creating a sort of a goal. What is an equitable city, a racially equitable Washington, D.C.? What does that look like? What are the key factors that would help someone to meet that? And so then when they develop their proposal, they could spell out, well, we're building more affordable housing, or we're employing more residents, or whatever. But so I think that front end process is really key, where you identify what a racially equitable Washington, D.C. looks like.
Is there did you didn't submit anything? Would you mind submitting some of that in writing, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I could do that. So where would I submit it?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to connect you with us.
Yeah, well, I'm on, if you go on
You can-
University of Pennsylvania's website, you could get my address, and someone, you can reach out to
You
me.
could, you could just email it to ZC, like Zoning Commission, submissions with an S on
Hold on,
the end.
let me jot this down real quick. Let me jot
Yeah,
this down.
let them. Yeah, I want to take time. Let's take time to do this. This is important.
Okay, ZC. I'm sorry.
Yeah, ZC, like Zoning Commission, the letter ZC, submissions with an S on the end at dc.gov. You
Okay.
can email it there, and in your subject line, if you could please put 22-RT1. That's the case number or the
Okay.
round table number.
And Mr. Freeman, I would just ask you, getting ready to give us a website to look at?
You said, was I getting ready to give you a website?
Yeah, just put it on when you submit it. I thought you was getting ready to told us to
Oh,
look at.
no, I don't have a website.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, I can email you information that I just shared with you, and we did a sort of a pilot racial equity report last summer. I could happy to share that with you as well.
Great, thank you. I would love for us to have that.
Okay. Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts, and good luck.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Okay, Ms. Shellen, you can continue.
Okay, so the next two people, we can only unmute them, and the first one is going to be Lydia Edwards.
Hi, everyone. I'm a senator over in Boston, but before I was a senator, I was a city councilor, and I helped to draft and pass the nation's first Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Zoning Amendment that essentially includes racial equity as part of our zoning requirements. So I'm going to walk you through that process. A lot of the questions and concerns voiced by people in, I used to actually live in DC, but a lot of folks in DC, I think we had those same questions and concerns when we developed this process in Boston. And I'll show you what we've done. And I'm happy to also send the website that actually outlines that process as well. So first, we adopted a zoning amendment, a text amendment that borrowed heavily from the standard of affirmatively furthering fair housing, essentially saying that in zoning, making it a legal standard, which is very important in terms of enforcement. By the way, I know a lot of people discuss that, but having it be a legal standard is something that allows for people in and outside of your zoning commission or just housing advocates to be able to hold the city accountable. That text amendment essentially says that we will remove obstacles to opportunity, take meaningful actions, to remove obstacles to opportunity, borrowing from the federal standard for AFFH. That's what I'm going to use when we're discussing affirmatively furthering fair housing. That then created a whole process that does the following. One developer comes in saying, I want to build, I don't know, a high rise somewhere in some neighborhood. Before they can go any further, the city comes up with 2 assessment tools. One is a historic displacement tool, defining whether the neighborhood itself has a history or pattern of segregation, and or 2, a displacement tool determining if they're dealing with gentrification that is at a level that they cannot handle. Those reports are given to the developer. We are grounded in the fact that if you're going to build in the city of Boston, you need to be helping. You need to heal racial concerns and issues, and we're making that a standard now for which we're going to judge your project. As we all know, and I'm sure you've heard, zoning is by far the most effective tool at segregating people and undoing fair housing legislation. So zoning, therefore, should be the most effective tool at actually integrating our communities and preventing displacement. It can be. So once we've defined what the issue is, just like we do with everything else, and I'm sure in DC you do the same thing. What's the traffic issue? What's the smog issue? What's the pollution issue? Then you put it on the developer's shoulders to say, you cannot enhance this issue. Matter of fact, you have to come up with different things to help fix it. So they are given a huge assessment toolkit, which I heard many people say that they want community involvement. Well, the best way we involved community was for community to come up with the self-assessment toolkit for the developer to fill out. It's many pages long. And in that toolkit, they are asked, how many units are you building? How deeply affordable are they? Were there people there before? Did you buy the building empty? Did you kick them out? Are you removing the only grocery store that we have? What are you doing? What are your plans? And basically, they have to be totally upfront. They don't get to say, I just bought this and decided to figure out how to make the numbers work. That's not true. And we need to know this because you could be hurting us racially. We have that entire assessment, and that is made public, which is also a way in which you can include the community. Always having this entire process and reports and assessments made public as you go along. So now that they've done the self-assessment, then you take the other part that we've included community involved in is coming up with the ways to heal, the mitigation. We came up with, I don't know how many different ways in which we've decided that the best way to help our communities is going to be defined by the community. And you as a developer, in order for your project to even be seen by the ultimate decider of whether you can go forward, you as a developer have to pick. And I'm sorry, I know that you went back and forth. I'm sorry, I'm going to ask for more time because I'm walking you through the process that was just described by the New York person as in theory that we're actually doing in Boston, that I helped.
Yeah, we gave you 5.
Very well. So this is actually working. We're doing it right now. And so ultimately, the community came up with many different forms of mitigation that the developer has to pick, and including right of first refusal, deeper affordability, putting Section 8 in their buildings, having DEI coordinators as part of their developing process, looking at so many different things on a daily basis, or excuse me, on a regular basis, that is a part of healing. They have to pick some of those things. They have to, or otherwise they don't go forward. And here's the goal and the ultimate enforcement mechanism that any zoning commission, planning commission, so on and so forth has. If they don't meet the legal standard, if they don't show that they are helping to heal from the racial harms that every single city, town has, their project doesn't go forward. That is the power you must give to, if you're truly invested in racial diversity, being part of zoning or planning, then you have to say no. Now, that doesn't mean that they can never meet that standard. You make them come back to the drawing table and you make them continue to go on and go forward until ultimately they can go forward. The other way in which you can involve community and ensure that they are part of the standard is having quarterly meetings, assessing the projects, how they went, and the entire time. And if you go to bostonplans.org, where they actually outline the history of this, the website, I know you mentioned one before, but it's bostonplans.org, housing affirmatively furthering fair housing, if you just Google that, they actually go through the entire process, the history, and why it's important that we do it this way. But it's a package.
Senator, I thank you, but what I'm going to ask, and I hate to put the burden of work on you, but I think I wrote down a few notes about the community assessment for the community up front, the mitigation. Your second, I would like if you could, and I didn't see your submission. It may be in there. I may just overlooked it, which I doubt. But if you could submit something to our web address to us, kind of the steps that you were outlining that Mr. Freeman was talking about, I think that'd be very helpful.
Sure, I will submit it to the. I'm sorry, your web address.
What's the address again, Mr.? It's ZDocs, and what's the
ZC, like zoning commission. So ZC submissions, plural, S on the end, at dc.gov.
I thank you so much, Senator, and please submit that. And thank you for helping us through this process. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us down here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Michelle, let's call the next person.
Mr. Fleming, you've been unmuted.
Yes. Does my camera not work? How can I?
That's correct. We can't, your camera's not working, so we're only able
So
to.
Cameron, I would like to see Mr. Fleming. Where is Mr. Fleming? We can't get Mr.
We
Fleming.
can't, the only thing we can do is unmute him. I don't know why.
I guess.
All right.
Well,
go right ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Chairman Hood. As you know, my name is Nathan Fleming, and I'm a lifelong resident of the district. I currently live in Ward 7. I currently am affiliated with Empower DC as a policy consultant. As you know, they're an organization that works to expand the political power of marginalized residents. A few recommendations for OZ's equity tool. I'm not going to, read my entire testimony. I'm just going to speak to a couple of things that I wanted to amplify. One, I think it's important to document historic and segregation and equitable practices. I think it's vital to invest in the research on a community-specific history of racism in housing and land use before taking steps to develop policy and plans. It's important that we have a firm understanding of past actions that produce our present conditions. I also think it's important to develop the displacement race index, as other people have said. Also, it's important to develop an access to opportunity index. When we have this neighborhood data, which identifies and categorizes areas in the city as it relates to level of displacement risk and level of access to opportunity, we can use those areas to help to guide equitable land use practices and decisions. So obviously, Seattle's an example of that. New York's a great example of the importance of developing a data tool. So as Mr. Freeman said, the data tool allows the public and the stakeholders to access data from the citywide, ward-wide, neighborhood, and census level data on issues like demographics, economic security, housing affordability. And this tool can be used to guide and shape land use policies. So I know that the chairman really asked for, what are some questions that can really help us? And so I'll just reserve the rest of my comments to that. In both New York and Boston, as the previous experts just spoke to, they require the submission of racial equity land use applications. And these reports seek to assess the displacement and racial equity impacts of a potential project. And then they identify goals and strategies that will advance the city's racial equity housing goals. And they put this burden on the applicants. So for example, in New York, they require a listing of the number of units by affordable unit type. So they require how many extremely low income units were there before, how many are there now, the expected rent and prices of the units, and the incomes that are needed to afford these new units without incurring housing cost burden.
1 minute.
Yep. And for non-residential uses, applicants must list the projected number of jobs that are being brought and the median wage levels of those jobs, and also the racial and ethnic composition and the educational attainment that's required to obtain those jobs. In Boston, we talked about their approach. I think their affirmative furthering fair housing tool, the questionnaire that they've developed, is something that's really important to take a look at to get some specific questions that we can ask here in DC. And I'll just close by speaking to the interventions. I do think it's important to have a list of interventions that we want applicants to take. In Boston, they include deepening the affordability of units beyond what would otherwise be required, providing a higher number of accessible units than otherwise would be required, matching or exceeding the percentage of family size units in the neighborhood, matching or exceeding the percentage or number of voucher units, increasing the density to accommodate a greater number of affordable units, and partnering with nonprofit developers to assist with affordable housing production. So in close, I look forward to working with the commission to create a tool that leads to equitable outcomes for DC residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. And I know colleagues just for give me a moment. I'm thinking about how to do things, and if you all have any questions, please chime. Mr. Fleming, if you don't mind, before you go, with all your work that you've been on the council, do you think any of this? And I know the council put that in the comp plan for us to work with, but some of the things that we're trying to achieve from your perspective on the council, do you think any of this we would have any roadblocks with the home rule charter? I'm just throwing that out there because I was thinking about it as you was talking.
So I think that, as you recognize, there's a lot that zoning can do, and there's a lot that planning can do. But we're speaking about zoning and to some degree planning in this context. So I think that a lot of this can be done within the power and the authority that's already been granted to your body. But certainly there's going to be some additional things that have to come from the council. And we do understand the restrictions that the council has based upon the home rule charter. And so that makes DC unique. We're not New York, we're not Boston, we're DC. So we're unique. So I think that there's a lot that can be done, but certainly for some things, we're going to need some additional legislation.
I really appreciate that, Mr. Fleming, because I was sitting here thinking about all other roadblocks that we're going to hit as the demand or what the expectation is for us to try to do. And I'm thinking about all the roadblocks. I got to look at the chart. I got to look at the comp plan. I got to look at the small area plan. One group wants this, the other group doesn't. So there's some things that we have to work through. But I appreciate your comments, and I hope you stay engaged. And I don't see where you submitted it, but if you have time, if you can submit it, I would.
Yes, I believe I submitted written testimony, but I'll make sure you guys have it.
Okay. If we have it, then somebody will direct me to it. I didn't see it, so I appreciate it. And thank you for your comments. All right, Michelle, I'm sorry. My colleagues got anything? Okay, let's keep going. Michelle, you're on mute. If you were saying
I'm sorry, Miss Ewing. You have 3 minutes. You can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I'll be brief. I am a resident in Ward 7, 5711 Eade Street Northeast. And one of the things that I think is so important is for the zoning commission to work with the other agencies. Some of the problems in Northeast Boundary that have been talked about with as far as unemployment, lack of a grocery store, addiction, those problems really need to be worked on in an interagency type of manner, and as well as housing vouchers, which it's been very heartbreaking to see families that cannot get adequate houses for their families. So really interagencies really looking at the problems together. Also to emphasize that there have been buildings approved and variances granted that I think have really decreased the value of houses in our neighborhood. It's been heartbreaking to look at homeowners that used to have a view out of their windows, and now all they can see is the vinyl of the house that just went up next to them. So those kinds of things I think are so important, as well as I love the idea that one of the persons talked about is having the developers really have to have a plan for how they're going to improve the neighborhood and what kinds of what kinds of improvements they're going to do. How are they going to give back to the neighborhood? And we certainly have a lot of we certainly have a lot of concerns about what's going to happen to parking in this neighborhood once all of these apartments and high rises go up that are around us. Thank you.
Okay, next panel. And this appears to be our last panel. Mr. Teresa, Ari Teresa, Michael Starnes, Brad Greenfield, and Ronald Kahn. Mr. Teresa, you can go ahead and start. You have 5 minutes.
Hello. Yeah, so it's good to be here and speaking with you all. I've been before this body many times. You know, the zoning commission, I study land use. I'm a land use attorney. I know important how land use decisions are to the formation of a city. And so the zoning commission in DC has held great sway over how this city has developed. And you know, they can accept responsibility for some positive things, but also some of the negative things as well. I think that when you look at DC and you look at how DC is developed, there's very little information about the decisions that the zoning commission has made in terms of like how that has impacted surrounding areas. When I study other cities, I look at the Bay Area, Chicago, New York. All of these cities have extensive studies about how land use decisions have impacted the surrounding area, like at the census tract level. How land use decisions, what type of land use decisions were made, and how it resulted in outcomes for members of the community. And in DC, there is nothing like that. I know that there are people who worked on it. I've worked on it. Coy McKinney has worked on it, and we've seen significant correlations between displacement and certain decisions of the zoning commission. But you know, that doesn't, you know, root out correlation not equaling causation. So, you know, there's that correlation problem. And there are, you know, academics and people who are able to do this stuff put together the probability value of this just being a coincidence. And I think that needs to be done in this city. And I think it's really weird that it hasn't been done. And I think before we roll out a racial equity tool, that's something that should be done and needs to be done. You know, like I said, I practice before the zoning commission. I've been before you all many times, have read many orders. So I'm not really in the dark about the zoning commission's positions about a lot of things. I read the orders, and I'm not placing it on any of the commissioners. You know, I know that you all have legal counsel and are advised to do certain things, but it seems like the commission's position is that the more housing, the better for prices, right? And so I can say, if that's going to be the zoning commission's position, that even with this racial equity tool, garbage in, garbage out, you know, we need to really sit down and study this city, look at the decisions that have been made, figure out how it has impacted people, and go from there. And until that's done, and I haven't seen it be done, then we're kind of going to be flying blind and in the dark here. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for hearing my testimony.
Okay, thank you. Next, Michael Stearns. Actually, he was not on, so Brad Greenfield.
Thank you, Commissioner Hood, members of the zoning commission. I represent ANC 6A. We have submitted written testimony. One of the benefits of going near the end is I can say a lot of dittos. A lot of the comments and thoughts that we had have already been raised by other presenters today, so I will try to skip over that for everyone's benefit. We do support and applaud the zoning commission for the racial equity tool. It is a very good first step in addressing economic inequalities. However, it needs to significantly change. A lot of our thoughts align to what others have said in terms of lining what other cities are doing and doing a more data-driven approach to analysis and determining zoning decisions. I would say beyond just gathering data and using data and metrics in the analysis, the zoning commission should also develop models for how different activities are likely to impact black flight, property values, housing costs. It's not just gathering data points, but developing models and developing feedback mechanisms so that as projects move forward and have impact, you can do a side-by-side comparison between what a project did and what was anticipated based on the model of that project. That would give, by doing a feedback mechanism, you can then adjust the model so that it's continually more improving and more accurate for the next project that uses it. We also believe that the tool should not just seek to mitigate and minimize the impact of economic flight and racial flight, but look for ways that it could be reversed or the situation should be improved in areas of the city where it's already occurred. Our ANC 6A, for a large part, has been developed, and there's already been black flight and racial inequities that are in place. If the tool simply seeks to cement that in place and not make things worse, that does not truly address the overall problem. We also believe that DC needs to provide more funding and build more housing on DC land to enable affordable housing programs and to make housing more affordable to working families and the working class throughout the city. We should be measuring the impact of direct displacement and using that measurement regardless of the size of new developments. Even smaller ones should be subject to the same standards. We should condition all zoning changes on a requirement that developers set aside a percentage of budgets or pay special fees to be used for the community's upkeep and improvements. And the tool should also quantify any jobs that are directly created, what types of jobs they are, and how they will be made available to DC residents. Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Mr. Khan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're
Okay.
speaking as an individual, correct?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. 3 minutes.
Okay, my name is Ronald Kahn. I live in Ward 3 ANC 34G, and I'm more of a process how-to person, so you know my orientation. And I'm going to skip most of my testimony, which I've submitted because I'm the last one anyhow. I want you to get out the door. So I'm going to cover a key point or two, and that's about it. Zoning commission processes have been identified as the what I call the landing zone for racial equity housing evaluation. And current zoning commission processes are more endpoint, blueprint, concrete, mortar, measurable in substance and process, kind of consistent also with the comp plan. And this is a late point in the process. So adding this process, assuming it can be done, would likely result in at least some non-compliance evaluations to fix or retrofit. This would have the potential of being quite inefficient. On the surface, perhaps it looks easier to use zoning as more of a funnel or a one-stop funnel at the end. This tasking considerably expands the zoning commission mission, role, expertise, and it would seem more effective, viable, and doable to develop and apply the racial lens to more the start and more natural points, where impacts are evaluated, developed, discussed, formulated, and applied. One off topic is, and I'm not even going to add that, but that's all I have to say. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate your Director Hood, the way you've been holding this meeting. It's been very informative, and I appreciate your role. That's it.
Chairman Hood, that is the end of the list of witnesses, and so I will yield to you.
Okay, I thank you. First of all, let me thank you, Ms. Shellen, for basically chairing the hearing. So thank you for doing that. Or chairing, this is not a hearing. Chairing the round table. I'm used to doing a lot of talking and trying to get to the bottom of things, and hopefully I know I did more than probably what I should have. But I was more interested in my colleagues. I appreciate all of them. We all were more interested than to hear as opposed to do a whole lot of talking. I think everybody made excellent points. And I'm just trying to figure out next steps, but I do know I want to keep the momentum going. I appreciate the involvement. I know there is a silent majority that I did not hear from. And my colleague, I don't know, and especially when it comes to something like this, we go to meetings too. We don't just sit behind here and do zoning. I'm in the community myself. And a lot of a certain group that I did not hear from that I need to get engaged as well, so we can balance this thing. I didn't hear from developers. I didn't hear from some of the community folks who may not necessarily think that all is bad. So it's trying to mix and balance a whole lot. And this commission, a lot of people understand we have a hard job. It's not easy at times. Sometimes even we don't get the outcomes in our discussions, give and take, and it's about you have a lot of competing interests but I can get into a whole lot. So next steps, I want to keep the momentum going. I want to make sure that this again works. I've heard my colleagues and I have heard all the comments, all the suggestions. So what I would like to do is, and we had 3, and I'm sure, well, I'm going to say we actually had 7 people taking notes. I have about 4 pages of notes. I have everybody's names, highlights of what they said for the most part. And I'm sure Commissioner May, who takes much better notes than I do, I'm sure he has some great notes. So I'm not sure when we can compile, but if not, we can use our own notes. I would like to have a discussion, colleagues, and I'm actually asking for your input because I'm only one vote. I would like to have a discussion about what we heard tonight, maybe November the 10th. That way we can, hopefully staff and everyone can capture all of the comments, and we can sit down and see how we can continue and then also talk with our legal counsel. So what does that sound like as far as next steps? Because I have some more proposals that I need to propose to my colleagues as we move on. Because I don't want this to just be a round table and we go back to the same old thing. That's over and done with. Tired of that. So it's time now. Let's see what we can do to make this work. The residents demand it. We demand it. So let's make it work. So let me hear from others. Commissioner May, any comments on some of that path forward?
It was a lot to absorb tonight. I don't think I have anything immediately that I want to say to it, but it does seem to me that there is definitely more that we should be doing with this tool than we have already done. So I really appreciate hearing from everybody, and I did take a lot of notes, and we will be working on this.
Great. Commissioner Emma Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I really appreciate the high level of interest from the community, the passion and energy around what's a really important issue for our city. So I'm ready. I certainly support moving forward with this and, taking next steps, having further discussions and, moving to some actionable results and outcomes. So.
All right, thank you. And Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Shellen, for leading us through this discussion. or this afternoon and evening's testimony from so many very knowledgeable members of the public, both who live in the district and who are familiar with other cities' experiences with developing this type of data and tool to evaluate land use decisions going forward. I read everything that was in the written record. I look forward to those who want to supplement what they've already submitted, and those who didn't submit writing. We invited, as the chairman invited, those who did not have an opportunity yet to submit written submissions to submit it to the ZC submissions at dc.gov. I think it's there on our website, dcoz.gov. Is that right? So I thank everybody for their interest and those and for submitting comments. We definitely, this was just a very initial step, and maybe obviously late in the game. But we're not reinventing a wheel here, although every city has their own unique history and path forward, and we want to tailor it right for the needs of the residents of the District of Columbia. But I think there are a lot of examples and models that we can build upon. I appreciate, again, Mr. Chairman, your leadership on this has been great, and I look forward to developing this tool in a way that will work for the public, work for the residents of the District of Columbia, work for the development community. People want a predictable process, but we want an equitable process. This is what this process is all about. So equitable process to get to more equitable outcomes. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I want to thank everyone. I don't want to start naming, but I want to thank everyone. I think I will. I want to thank the community, specifically the community. I really appreciate it. I want to thank the staff, our Office of Zoning Legal Division, who had the impetus to really start putting this together. I want to thank the leadership of Ms. Barden and Ms. Shellen and our whole Office of Zoning Office. I want to thank you all for doing this. This does not come lightly, because I know a lot of thought and work went into this. And I know this is the first one. I do want to continue to have these type of conversations because I want to make this work where the rubber meets the road for my remainder of my tenure for as long as I'm here. So I think it's important. I think this is long overdue. I think there are a lot of people now who've gone on to get whatever reward they were getting, who've gone on, who fought to try to get to this point. And I want to thank the mayor and also Councilman McDuffie for writing this legislation, and for the council for putting it in and putting some teeth, because under the leadership of Gerald Lee Kresh years ago, we talked about leveling the playing field, but we didn't have the law behind it. So I want to thank everybody. And if I missed you, I forgot to call your name, I thank you too. And Michelle, and again, thank you for chairing here. And I'm turning over to you. You want to close us out? No, I need to close this out.
I wanted to ask, if I may, you talked about leaving the record open for 2 weeks. I just want to confirm that.
Yes.
Okay, so that way we can get everything to the commissioners to review prior to the November 10th meeting. So all submissions would be due. I'm instead of 3 o'clock, I'm just going to say by midnight. That's usually our time of October 6th. That would be 2 weeks.
And November 10th is just going to be I don't know what our other agenda looks like, but this is going to be a public discussion where we're going to throw some things around as our path to move forward. I'm sure my colleagues and I will make recommendations, things that we will do. I'm sure we will have our Office of Zoning Legal Division conversating with us through that process. So that's how I envision it. I believe that can work. Anything else, Michelle?
No, sir. That's it.
All right, this round table, I'm gonna close this round table. Let me see. The zoning commission will meet again. Second, I usually get this wrong, but I think
Not always.
Not always, September the 29th?
You're correct.
Oh, okay, good. And then we will have our regular, that will be our regular meeting, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Okay, so I want to thank everyone for their participation in this roundtable. We really appreciate everyone's interest and their time. Hope you all have a great evening, and we'll be back on these same platforms September 29th for one of our meetings. Good night, everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you.